My wife locked eyes with me over our walnut kitchen table and declared I was unwelcome at my own home for Christmas, too difficult, she said. Not a word left my lips. I sat there sipping black tea perfectly still while she read my quiet as a white flag. Just an old man folding. Then, at exactly 12:12 a.m. on Christmas morning, my phone rang. My son Darnell was screaming, "Dad, the FBI is at the door, and your name is all over the news." I didn't flinch. 4 decades spent managing global risk teaches you something about keeping your head. The truth was on my side. Nothing I'd done was wrong. I had simply balanced the books. Welcome back to His Hidden Revenge. I am glad you are here for this one. It is a story that has stayed with me, and I think it will stay with you too. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me who. In this story, are you already pulling for? And why I would love to hear your thoughts. Now, a quick note, some elements of this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. I am 68 years old. For 3 decades, I served as vice president of logistics for a transnational shipping conglomerate. My job was to hunt down inefficiencies and kill them. My job was to catch fraud before the auditors ever got close. I retired 2 years ago to enjoy what I'd built, but I never stopped watching the numbers. It was December 23rd. The morning light was cutting across the frost on the windows of our estate in quiet western Pennsylvania. My wife Dorothea set her cup down with a sharp clink that landed like a judge's gavel. She wouldn't look at me. She smoothed the fabric of her silk robe, a robe I'd bought her in Milan, and delivered the verdict. "Wendell, we've discussed it as a family. It's best if you don't come to the cottage this Christmas." The cottage was a generous word for it. A 6-bedroom lakefront property on the Pennsylvania and Ohio border, purchased with my performance bonuses in the 90s, my sanctuary. And now my wife was telling me I was an intruder in it. I looked at her. I looked at my son, Darnell. 32 years old, eyes fixed on his buttered toast, as though it contained the answers to questions he was afraid to ask. He couldn't meet my gaze. Then I looked at Priscilla, my daughter-in-law. 29 years old, with the kind of polished smile that never quite climbed to her eyes. She was spreading butter across her toast with the focus of a surgeon. "Why?" I asked. My voice was level. I didn't raise it. I learned early that the one who raises his voice has already surrendered the advantage. Priscilla answered before Dorothea had the chance. She looked up, offering a slow, rehearsed expression of sorrow. "Oh, Dad, it isn't that we don't want you there. It's just that you've been so stressed lately. You make the children uneasy. You bring tension into the room. We just want a few days to breathe. We want a healing Christmas." Heal. That was the word of the season. My son hadn't held a real job in 4 years, and yet he needed to heal. Priscilla spent her days running a non-profit with zero measurable impact, but impressively high overhead. And yet she needed to heal. Dorothea finally turned her eyes to me. They were flat. "You've been difficult, Wendell. Last week was embarrassing. You made Darnell feel small. You made Priscilla cry. We can't have that negative energy around the investors." She caught herself. "I mean, the friends we invited for dinner." She'd slipped. She said investors, but I let it pass. I knew precisely what she meant. She was talking about the incident with the check. Let me take you back 7 days. That was the real reason I was being exiled from my own holiday. A Tuesday evening, Darnell and Priscilla had come over for dinner. We were gathered in the living room. I was nursing a bourbon neat. Priscilla had pulled out her tablet and launched into a presentation. She always had a presentation. She was pitching her latest venture, something she called the Bright Future Foundation. "Dad," she'd said, her eyes lit with a hunger dressed up as compassion. "We have a massive opportunity. There's a gala in Chicago next month, a networking goldmine. If Darnell and I can secure a platinum table, we can lock in donors for the entire year. We just need the seed money for the table and the branding package." "How much?" I asked. "50,000," she said. I didn't flinch. $50,000 was real money, but not inconceivable. Still, I am a man of logistics. I measure return on investment. "Show me the prospectus," I said. "Show me the prior year's tax filings for the foundation. Show me the line items." The room went quiet. Darnell shifted in his chair. "Dad, come on. It's charity. You don't audit charity." "I audit everything, Darnell. That's how I paid for the college degree you're not using." Priscilla's smile wobbled. "We're still finalizing the paperwork from last year. Our accountant runs behind, but we need this check today, Dad. The gala deadline is tomorrow. If we miss this window, we lose the chance to help thousands of underprivileged youth. I studied her. I saw the designer bag sitting at her feet. I saw the new SUV occupying my driveway. I watched the way Dorothea was nodding along, enchanted by the vision of her son as a philanthropist. I rose and crossed to my desk. I opened my checkbook. I saw the relief wash across their faces. They were certain they had won. I wrote the check, tore it free, and handed it to Priscilla. The color drained out of her face. It was for $500. "What is this?" she whispered. "That's a donation," I said. "When you bring me audited financials, we can talk about capital investment. Until then, $50,000 for a party isn't charity, it's vanity." Priscilla burst into tears. Darnell hurled his glass into the fireplace and it exploded. Dorothea screamed that I was a miser who despised his own family. They stormed out. That was the incident. That was my crime. Back at the kitchen on the morning of December 23rd, I surveyed all three of them. They had closed ranks against the checkbook. To them, I wasn't a father or a husband. I was a blockage in their cash flow. "So that is the decision?" I asked. "I'm not welcome in my own house." Dorothea rose from her chair. "It's for the best, Wendell. Stay here. Rest. Watch some football. We'll bring you back a plate of leftovers." Leftovers. After 40 years of marriage, after I built every asset that paid for those diamonds on her wrist, she was offering me leftovers. I looked at Darnell, eyes still down. "Son, do you stand behind this?" He barely moved his jaw. "Priscilla is really stressed, Dad." "It's just 1 year. Don't make a scene." I nodded, measured, deliberate. "Very well," I said. "I won't come. I hope you find the healing you're after." Priscilla's face broke into a wide grin, a winner's grin. "Thank you for understanding, Dad. We'll FaceTime you Christmas morning." They cleared their plates in a hurry. The atmosphere in the room changed. They were buoyant. They moved like people who had just pulled off a successful con. They loaded the car. They packed cases of expensive wine gourmet provisions and gifts I knew I'd indirectly bankrolled. I stood on the porch and watched them pull away. Dorothea was adjusting her makeup in the visor mirror. Darnell was behind the wheel. Priscilla was already on her phone in the back seat, no doubt coordinating the occupation of my property. They rounded the bend and vanished down the long driveway. The quiet of the empty house folded in around me. It should have felt lonely. It should have been the kind of moment that breaks a man 68 years old, abandoned by his family at Christmas. But I did not feel sad. I felt cold. I felt precise. I felt the same way I used to feel walking into a hostile takeover meeting. I went back inside. I locked the front door. I moved to my study and settled into my leather chair. I picked up the family portrait from the desk. I laid it face down. Then I reached for the phone, not to call a friend and vent, not to call a therapist. I dialed the private client services line at my bank. I worked through the verification prompts. I entered my security codes. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," the operator said. "How can we assist you today?" I turned the chair toward the gray sky outside the window. "Good morning," I said. "I need to make a security adjustment to my account. I need you to place an immediate freeze on the supplementary credit card issued to Dorothea Caldwell." A brief pause. "Certainly, sir. Is the card lost or stolen?" I took a sip of my black tea. "Neither," I said. "I have reason to believe the spending on that card is no longer authorized by the primary account holder. Block it. Decline everything effective immediately." "Done," the operator said. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "Do the same for the emergency cards held by Darnell Caldwell, and flag any transaction that it attempts to clear as potential fraud. I want their wallets as empty as this house." "Thank you, sir. It's taken care of." I set the phone down. I leaned back and let my eyes close. I could picture them out on the highway, heading north toward the Ohio border, laughing, convinced the old man had been put to pasture. They believed they had cut me off. They had no idea I'd just severed the fuel line to their engine. This wasn't merely a Christmas snub. This was about respect. And sitting there in the stillness, I understood this was only the opening move. I turned to my computer. I pulled up the application that controlled the security systems for the cottage. I pulled up the live feed. The house sat empty waiting for them. But then I checked the access logs. Someone had been on the property the day before. A cleaning crew, a catering crew. I pulled up the driveway camera footage from the previous day and zoomed in. Trucks were offloading equipment, sound systems, lighting rigs, crate upon crate of liquor that had no business at a quiet family getaway. Then I spotted Priscilla on the footage directing the workers like a stage manager. I turned up the audio on the recorded clip. "Make sure the champagne tower goes in the main foyer," she was telling one of the workers. "We need to impress these people. Once they sign the checks, we can buy this place from the old man for pennies on the dollar. He won't even know what hit him." I froze. I played it back. "Buy this place for pennies on the dollar." This was not a party. This had nothing to do with me being difficult. This was a liquidation event. They were turning my home into a venue for their scam foundation's fundraiser and planning to use whatever leverage that bought them to push me out of my own assets. I sat in the stillness of my empty house and felt a smile move across my face. It was not a warm one. I picked up my phone. This time I dialed a number I hadn't called in close to a year. "Renee," I said when she picked up. "Wendell, it's Christmas Eve. What's happened?" Renee Okafor was my attorney, sharper than a razor and at least twice as cold. "Nothing has happened," I told her, "but I need you to open a file. I need a full forensic background check on something called the Bright Future Foundation, and I need to know exactly who is on the guest list for a party being held at my cottage tomorrow night. Wendell, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, "but my family is about to have a very difficult Christmas." I hung up. I watched the screen. My family was roughly 2 hours from the cottage. They had my credit cards tucked in their pockets. They had a scheme to strip me bare, but they had overlooked one thing. I own the house. I own the accounts, and I own the data. I went to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I ate it slowly. I enjoyed the quiet. I knew that within about 3 hours the first card would get declined at a gas station or a wine shop. I intended to be ready for that phone call, but the call didn't come from Dorothea. It didn't come from Darnell. At 3:00 p.m., my phone buzzed. A notification from the bank app. Transaction declined, 5400, the Cartwright Reserve, card ending in 4098, Dorothea Caldwell. I swiped it away. $5,000 in wine for a healing weekend. 10 minutes later, the house phone rang. I let it ring. I checked the caller ID. Dorothea? 4 calls in a row. I finally answered. "Hello," I said, voice thick, feigning sleep. "Wendell." Her voice came through like a siren. "Something is wrong with the card. I'm standing at the counter with 5 cases of vintage Merlot, and it won't go through. Fix it." I yawned. "Dorothea? I thought you were healing. Why are you spending $5,000 on wine? Don't you dare audit me right now. We have guests coming. Fix the card." "Guests?" I asked. "I thought it was just the 3 of you." A beat of silence, a stutter, a lie assembling itself in real time. We ran into some old friends on the way up. We invited them for a drink, just a handful of people. Don't be petty, Wendell. Call the bank." I glanced at the security feed on my monitor. The catering trucks were already at the cottage, just a handful of people. "I'm sorry, Dorothea," I said. "I can't call the bank right now. There's a security hold on the account. They flagged it this morning, unusual spending patterns, possible identity theft. I have to appear at the branch in person to clear it." "Then go now." "I can't," I said. "The branch is closed for the holiday. They don't reopen until the 26th. The line went silent, the pure suffocating silence of panic. "Wendell, you have to do something. We need that wine." I'd suggest using cash, Dorothea, or perhaps Priscilla can run the foundation's card. I'm sure a registered charity can find a way to justify $5,000 worth of alcohol. I set the phone down. I unplugged it from the wall. Phase 1 was finished. The supply line was severed. Now it was time to examine the enemy more closely. I went back to my desk. Renee had sent over a preliminary file on the Bright Future Foundation. I opened the PDF and began reading, and what I found turned my blood cold. This was not a vanity project. This was a Ponzi scheme. And my name, Wendell Caldwell, was listed as the honorary chairman of the board. They had forged my signature. I sat there staring at the document, my son, my wife, my daughter-in-law. They weren't merely ungrateful, they were criminals. And they were using my name and reputation to reel in investors from across the Ohio border. I reached for the bourbon. I poured a glass and checked the time. 4:30 p.m. The party was set for tomorrow night. I had 24 hours to dismantle everything they had built, and I had no intention of leaving my study to do it. I opened a new email. I typed in the address of a journalist I knew in Toronto, a man who made his living covering cross-border financial fraud. Subject: "You might want to look at the party at 18 Lakeridge Point." I attached the PDF. I attached the security footage of Priscilla talking about buying the house for pennies. I hit send. Then I leaned back and let the night come. This was going to be a Christmas none of them would ever forget. And I was only just beginning. The silence in my house had changed. It was no longer empty. It was dense with the weight of what was coming. Outside snow had begun to fall, laying a white blanket across the driveway. It looked peaceful, but on my screen inside the cottage, the storm was already gathering. And I had a front row seat. The quiet in my primary residence was not the quiet of a man left behind. It was the weighted, coiled silence of a war room in the minutes before the first move is made. I walked through the halls of the home I had paid for with 30 years of missed birthdays and postponed vacations, and a strange clarity settled over me. Dorothea believed she had punished me by leaving me here, but she had handed me the greatest advantage she could have offered: time and privacy, with no one looking over my shoulder. I didn't shuffle to the kitchen to brood over leftovers. I went directly to my study. That room was my true sanctuary. It was lined with oak bookshelves filled with volumes on contract law and global logistics economics. At the center sat my desk, a solid slab of walnut that had belonged to a railroad executive in the 1920s. I settled into my leather chair and swiveled to face the wall of monitors I'd had installed when I retired. Most men my age use computers to browse photos of their grandchildren or to play solitaire. I used mine to watch my assets. I entered a sequence of passwords Dorothea would never crack. They had nothing to do with her birthday or our anniversary. The screens came to life. I connected to the remote security node for the cottage. The system was state-of-the-art, a high-definition web of cameras and microphones I'd put in 2 years ago after a series of break-ins swept through the area. I had never mentioned the upgrade to Darnell or Priscilla. They assumed the blinking red lights on the porch were decoys. They were wrong. The feed loaded sharp and clear. Light snow was falling near the border, but my lake house driveway was buzzing with activity. I leaned forward and adjusted my glasses. I had expected to see my family hauling in luggage, maybe kindling a fire for a quiet evening in. What I found instead made my jaw go tight. There were 4 black vans parked on my lawn. Not in the driveway on the grass. I paid a landscaper $2,000 a month to keep immaculate. Men in coveralls were hauling out crates. I switched to the interior cameras. The living room, which I had designed to breathe and be still, looked like the backstage of a production. Priscilla stood at the center of it. She had a headset on and a clipboard in hand, running the operation like a site foreman. I zoomed in. She was pointing at my walls. 2 men were lifting the painting down from above the fireplace. It wasn't just a painting. It was an original work by a prominent Harlem Renaissance artist, a piece my father had acquired in the 50s, the most valuable thing in that house, and not merely in dollar terms. I watched as the men handled it with all the care of moving furniture, leaning it against a sofa like it was a sheet of plywood. Then I saw what they were putting up in its place. A vinyl banner, a cheap glossy vinyl banner reading Bright Future Foundation Winter Gala. A cold rage settled into my gut. This was no healing retreat. This was an occupation. They were converting my private home into a venue for their fraud. I switched to the dining room camera. My antique table, the one that seated 12, had been shoved against the wall. In its place, workers were assembling high-top cocktail tables and a portable bar. They were gutting my sanctuary and replacing it with a pop-up nightclub. I watched Dorothea step into the frame. She had a glass of wine in her hand and was laughing with one of the workmen. She moved through the room with a proprietary ease that made my skin crawl. She wasn't stopping them. She wasn't protecting a single thing. She was reveling in the chaos. She pointed at my leather armchair, the one where I read every morning, and made a dismissive shooing gesture. The workman grabbed it and dragged it out of frame, presumably to be dumped in the garage or the basement. They were erasing me. That's the only accurate description. They were methodically stripping every trace of Wendell Caldwell from that property. My books were being swept off shelves into boxes. My model ship collection was being tossed into a laundry basket. They were scrubbing the house clean of my presence so they could parade a fiction in front of their guests. I sat in my study 400 miles away, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. I watched them for a full hour. I logged every piece of furniture they relocated and every gouge they left in the hardwood. I was compiling a damage ledger in my head, but the visual insults were nothing compared to what came next. I saw Darnell enter the living room. He looked agitated, pacing back and forth, gesturing with his arms. Priscilla broke off from directing the workers and turned to face him. They began to argue. I reached for the control panel on my desk and activated the high-gain audio microphones in the living room. The sound was razor sharp. It was as though I were standing in the room with them. Darnell was speaking. His voice was high and strained. Priscilla, we cannot sell tickets at the door. That's illegal. We don't have a permit for a commercial event. Priscilla laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Darnell, stop being such a coward. It's a private party. We're asking for donations. It's a gray area. Besides, who's going to report us? Your dad is sitting at home eating turkey sandwiches. He has no idea what's happening. Darnell rubbed his face. But what if the neighbors call the cops? The noise ordinance is strict up here. Let them call, Priscilla said. We'll be done by midnight. Look, Darnell, we need this money. We're underwater on the condo. We're underwater on the cars. If we pull this off tonight, we clear 200 grand easy. Darnell glanced at the banner hanging over the fireplace. But using the house, Dad is going to notice things have been moved. He's senile Darnell, Priscilla snapped it out. She moved toward him and grabbed his lapels. Listen to me, he's losing it. He forgot to sign the check last week. Remember, he's getting confused. We just need to keep pushing that narrative. I went still. I was not confused last week. I had refused to sign the check because it was a bad investment. She was rewriting history. Priscilla went on, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the microphone captured without effort. Once the gala wraps, we take the proceeds and we hire that lawyer my mother knows. We file for competency hearings. We tell the judge your father can no longer manage his own affairs. We show them how he hoards money while his family goes without. We get power of attorney Darnell. And once we have that, we sell this place. Sell it? Darnell asked. Yes, sell it. She hissed the words. The market is strong. This property is worth at least $3 million. We sell it. We park the money inside the foundation and pay ourselves a salary. We never have to work again. And your dad goes into a nice facility where they can manage his moods. It's a win-win. I sat back in my chair. The air had been punched out of me. This was not a party. This was a coup. They were conspiring to strip me of my autonomy, my home, and my dignity. They wanted to warehouse me so they could liquidate 4 decades of my labor to bankroll their lives. I looked at Darnell on the monitor, my son, the boy I'd taught to fish on the very lake. The boy I had pulled out of trouble more times than I cared to count. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to say, no, that's my father you're talking about. He didn't. He looked at Priscilla and gave a slow nod. Okay, he said, but we have to be smart about it. We can't let him get suspicious. We have to make him think retiring is his own idea. We will, Priscilla said. She kissed him on the cheek. You're a good husband, Darnell. We're doing this for our future, for their future, a future built on my grave. I killed the audio. I could not listen to another word. My hand trembled as I reached for the glass of water on my desk. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from the cold, sober recognition that the people I had loved were predators. I was not a father to them. I was a resource, a vein of gold they intended to mine until nothing was left. I checked the clock. Early afternoon. The party was still hours out. They believed I was a senile old man. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was alone. I picked up my phone. I scrolled until I found the name I needed. Renee Okafor answered on the first ring. Wendell, she said. I sent you the foundation file. Did you receive it? I did, I said. My voice sounded foreign to me, like gravel dragged across concrete. But Renee, I need something more. What do you need? She asked. I need you to build a litigation strategy, I said. I want you to pull the statutes on elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. And Renee, I want you to retain a private investigator to get to the cottage tonight. I want high-resolution photographs of every single person who walks through that door. Wendell, what exactly is happening? Her tone sharpened. All business. My son and his wife are planning to have me declared incompetent, I said. They intend to sell my house out from under me. The fundraiser they're running right now is meant to generate the legal fees to do it. A silence fell over the line. Then I heard the rapid clatter of a keyboard. I'm opening a new file right now, Wendell. Then she said, do not confront them yet. Let them dig the hole. We'll push them in later. I'm not going to confront them, Renee, I said. I'm going to destroy them. I ended the call. I turned back to the screen. Priscilla was laughing at something one of the workmen said. She moved through the room like she owned it. Enjoy it while it lasts, my dear, I said to the empty room. Because by tomorrow morning, you won't even own the clothes on your back. I swiveled back to my computer. Time to work. I had a supply chain to disrupt, a cash flow to freeze, and a family to dismantle. The silence of the house was no longer heavy. It was focused. It was the quiet before the blade falls. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. The email from Renee arrived with a ping that cut through the stillness of my study like a shot. The subject line was clean and professional. Bright Future Foundation, preliminary financials. I didn't open it immediately. I took a moment to settle my reading glasses and straighten the papers on my desk. In 30 years of running logistics for a global shipping conglomerate, I learned one thing about manifests. You don't open them unless you're prepared to deal with what's inside. I took a sip of water. My hands were steady, heart rate 60 beats per minute. I was not a father looking over his son's homework. I was an auditor standing at a crime scene. I clicked the mouse. The file came up. A PDF thick with tables and pie charts engineered to look authoritative to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. I ignored the colorful graphics. I went straight to the raw numbers. I scrolled past the mission statement about empowering youth across borders. Word salad, a carefully blended cocktail of buzzwords designed to make wealthy people feel guilty enough to reach for their checkbooks. I went directly to the cash flow statement. The foundation had been operating for 18 months. In that time, they had raised $250,000, $250,000. I felt a flicker of genuine surprise. I hadn't credited Darnell and Priscilla with the discipline to pull in that kind of capital. Then I looked at the donor list. It was dense with names I recognized: country club members, business associates from Toronto. They had worked my contact list. They had used my name to open doors that would have been shut in their faces without it. I moved to the expense column. This is where the story always unravels. A legitimate charity carries overhead between 10 and 15%. The Bright Future Foundation was running at 85%. I ran it again. 85 cents of every donated dollar was disappearing before it reached any charitable purpose. I drilled into the line items. Enormous payments sat under consulting fees, $7,000 per month, to something called CNT Strategic Solutions. I opened a browser tab and pulled up the state business registry. CNT Strategic Solutions was an LLC registered to a P.O. box at a strip mall 3 towns over. The registered agent was Priscilla Novak. They were billing themselves $7,000 a month to consult for their own charity. I kept going. Travel expenses came in at $40,000. The destinations included Scottsdale, Las Vegas, and a ski resort in Park City, all of it categorized as donor outreach. I recalled seeing photos on social media of Priscilla in a bikini in Scottsdale holding a cocktail. That cocktail was underwritten by the widow of my former business partner, who had donated $5,000 the previous Christmas. The anger I felt was not hot. It was the temperature of absolute zero. This wasn't mismanagement. This was embezzlement. It was theft. And it was sloppy. They had left a paper trail wide enough for a blind man to walk down. They were treating the foundation like a personal expense account. Luxury car leases categorized as transportation logistics. Designer clothing billed as uniform and branding expenses. I looked at the screen and I stopped seeing my son as a young man struggling to find his footing. I saw a parasite. He was feeding off the goodwill of strangers. He was stealing from people whose trust in me had opened their wallets. I had spent 40 years building a name for absolute integrity. In the shipping business, your word is your collateral. If you say the cargo is there, it is there. Darnell and Priscilla were selling empty containers with my name stenciled on the side. I picked up a pen and began working a legal pad. I calculated the tax exposure. I estimated the sentencing range for wire fraud. I worked out the civil penalties. They were already drowning. If the IRS walked in today, they would be in handcuffs before sundown. But the IRS moved at its own pace. I needed something faster. I needed to understand the full depth of the rot. I scrolled to the bottom of the document, the section labeled Board of Directors and Governance. Typically a formality, a roster of community figures lending credibility. I expected Darnell listed as Executive Director. He was. I expected Priscilla as President. She was. Then I found the third name, Honorary Chairman of the Board, Wendell Caldwell. I stopped breathing. The room contracted around me. My name in bold black type, but it was what sat beside it that made my vision swim. A signature. My signature. I leaned toward the monitor. I know my signature the way I know my own reflection. A particular loop on the W, SA sharp aggressive cross on the double L. A signature I'd refined over decades of executing million-dollar contracts. And there it sat at the bottom of a document authorizing the bylaws of a fraudulent organization. I had never signed this. I had never laid eyes on this document before in my life. I zoomed to 400%. I examined the pixels. The ink looked too uniform, too consistent. It lacked the subtle pressure variations of a real pen on real paper. It was a digital lift. They had pulled my signature from an old check, or a card scanned it and dropped it onto this document. This had crossed out of family dispute territory entirely. This was forgery. This was identity theft. This was a federal crime. By putting me on the board, they had made me legally liable for every dollar they stole. If investigators came knocking, they would come to me first. They were using me as a human shield. I settled back into my leather chair, and the leather let out a slow creak in the silence. I looked at the family photo I had turned face down on the desk. I flipped it over. I studied Darnell's face from 10 years ago. He looked so young then, so open. How do you get from there to here? How does the boy I taught to ride a bike become the man willing to put his father's name on a fraud document? By then I understood the architecture clearly. Priscilla had designed it. Darnell was the willing hand. He had watched her do it. He may well have been the one to scan the signature himself. He had traded me for a car lease and a few long weekends out of town. The betrayal had a physical weight to it, a pressure in my chest that sat there and didn't move. But inside that weight was a clarity like cut glass. They had crossed the line you don't walk back from. There was no apology with the range to cover this. No family conversation that resolves a felony. I reached for the phone to call Renee, then set it back down. Renee was a lawyer. She would tell me to file a police report. She would tell me to seek an injunction. That was the proper legal path. But the proper legal path was public. It would drag my name through every headline for months. I needed a surgical strike. I needed to excise the cancer before it metastasized. I needed the truth to surface through someone else, a third party, who could look at these numbers and reach the same conclusion independently, someone who had a platform and the appetite to use it. I thought through my network, regulators, auditors. Then I remembered the journalist. His name was Conrad Pemberton, an investigative reporter out of Toronto who spent his career dismantling cross-border financial crimes. 5 years ago, he had run an expose on a charity scam, moving cash between Detroit and Windsor. He was relentless, precise, and carried a contempt for fraudsters that bordered on personal vendetta. I had crossed paths with him once at a logistics conference where he was a speaker. We had shared a drink afterward. He had pressed his card into my hand and told me that if I ever noticed anything irregular in the shipping lanes to reach out. I opened my email client, not my personal account. I used a secure encrypted address I maintained for sensitive business matters, one that couldn't be traced back to my home IP. I entered his address in the recipient field. The subject line needed to be unremarkable, but impossible to ignore. Subject: financial irregularities regarding cross-border solicitations. Bright Future Foundation. I began writing. I did not use my name. I wrote as a concerned insider, a former employee perhaps, or a disillusioned donor. Dear Mr. Pemberton, I am writing regarding a matter of significant public interest involving the solicitation of funds from Canadian citizens by a U.S.-based entity known as the Bright Future Foundation. Attached, you will find preliminary financial documents indicating an overhead ratio exceeding 80%. You will also find evidence of payments directed to shell companies registered to the Foundation's own directors. I paused. I needed to hand him the hook, something that would compel him to move tonight on Christmas Eve. I continued. Furthermore, there is evidence that the Foundation has been using the name and forged signature of a prominent logistics executive to secure donations without his knowledge or consent. The directors are currently hosting an unregistered fundraising gala at a private residence in western Pennsylvania near the Ohio border. They are soliciting six-figure commitments from your countrymen as we speak. I attached the PDF Renee had forwarded. I attached the screenshots of the CNT Strategic Solutions registration. Then I attached the video clip I'd saved the security footage where Priscilla had openly discussed acquiring the house at a fraction of its value using the gala funds. I stared at the composed email. It was a torpedo. Once launched, there was no pulling it back. Conrad Pemberton would smell blood the moment it hit his screen. He would dig. He would make calls. He would publish. If I sent this, my son would face prison. My daughter-in-law would face prison. My wife would be publicly destroyed. The Caldwell name would be permanently scarred. But if I held back, they would win. They would execute fraud under my name. They would steal my home. They would have me locked away. They would dismantle everything I had spent a lifetime building, and they would be laughing while they did it. I stared at the cursor blinking at the end of the line, steady, rhythmic, like a pulse. I thought about the $50,000 check. I thought about the word difficult. I thought about that empty chair at the Christmas table, the one that was supposed to be mine. They wanted a legacy. I would give them exactly that. I moved the mouse. My finger hung over the send button. My hand was perfectly still. A strange detachment came over me, as though I were watching the scene from the far corner of the room. The father in me was screaming, "Stop, protect them one final time." But the other man in me, the man governed by logic and consequence, understood that protection was the very thing that had built this monster. You cannot shield people from what they truly are. You can only shield the world from them. I pressed down. The screen refreshed. Message sent. It was done. That packet of information was tearing through fiber optic cables heading north toward Toronto. It would land in Conrad Pemberton's inbox within seconds. The man was a workaholic. I knew he'd be checking email even on Christmas Eve. I closed the laptop. The room felt changed. The air itself had a charge to it. The war had officially started. I had fired the opening shot, and they didn't even know they were in a fight. I rose and crossed to the window. Outside was pure darkness. The snow was coming down harder. Somewhere up north at the cottage, the champagne was flowing, and music was filling the rooms. They were toasting their own cleverness. I walked to the liquor cabinet and poured myself another drink. I raised the glass toward the window, toward the dark reflection staring back at me from the glass. "Merry Christmas, Darnell," I whispered. I returned to the desk and settled in. Now came the waiting. But I wasn't simply going to sit idle. I had access to the smart home system at the cottage. I had control over the environment. If they wanted a celebration, I would give them quite a show. I pulled up the control panel for the house systems. I studied the thermostat settings. I studied the lighting controls. I studied the audio distribution panel. They had forged my signature. They had stolen my money. Now they were going to lose their comfort. I cracked my knuckles. Time to introduce a few technical difficulties to the evening's festivities. The audit was finished. The execution phase was underway. The vibration of my phone against the walnut desk came as a short, violent burst that shattered the quiet of my study. Not a ring, a bank notification. I picked up the device and adjusted my reading glasses. The screen blazed in the dim room. Transaction declined. 5400. The Cartwright Reserve card ending in 4098. I smiled, small, tight, not a tooth showing. That was Dorothea's card. She was standing at a checkout counter, some 400 miles away, most likely surrounded by cases of expensive French wine meant to impress people she barely knew. And I had just humiliated her in the only language she genuinely spoke, which was the language of access. For 40 years, Dorothea had moved through the world with the ease of a woman who had never once needed to check a balance. She laid plastic on counters without a glance at the total. She assumed the funds were always there because I had always been there quietly replenishing the accounts, like a utility that simply ran in the background. But today the lights had gone out. I set the phone down and waited. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. On the count of 10, the landline on my desk began to scream. Shrill, demanding. I let it ring 4 times. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to feel the cashier's eyes and the stares of the people lined up behind her. I wanted her to feel the heat of shame climbing into her face. I lifted the receiver on the 5th ring. "Hello," I said, calm, detached. The voice of a man who had been dozing, not the voice of a man who had just executed a precise financial strike. Wendell Fixit. Dorothea did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She screamed into the phone with such a blend of panic and fury that the speaker distorted. "Fix what, Dorothea?" I asked. I leaned back in my leather chair and took a slow sip of my bourbon neat. "The card," she shrieked. "The damn card is declining. I am standing here with $5,000 worth of Bordeaux, and the machine is beeping at me. The cashier is looking at me like I am a pauper. Call the bank. Authorize the charge right now." I paused. I let the silence breathe across the line. I pictured the scene clearly. The Cartwright Reserve was an upscale shop near the border. It smelled of oak and inherited money. Dorothea would be in her fur coat, manicured nails, tapping against the glass counter. "Dorothea," I said slowly, "I cannot fix it." "What do you mean you cannot fix it? You are Wendell Caldwell. You fix everything. Call them. I am looking at the alert on my phone right now. I said it shows the card has been flagged for suspicious activity. The bank's fraud algorithm locked it automatically. They suspect the card has been stolen or cloned based on unusual spending in a different geographic location. It is me, she yelled. I am the one spending it. Tell them it is me. I cannot do that over the phone. I lied. My voice was smooth as oil. Since the security breach last year, they overhauled their protocols. For a transaction of this size triggered by a fraud alert, the primary account holder must appear in person at a branch with 2 forms of identification. Silence fell across the line, the silence of a woman who suddenly understood she was trapped. Go to the branch, then she hissed. Go to the one on Main Street. I cannot, Dorothea. It is Christmas Eve. The branch closed at noon. It won't reopen until the 26th. You have to do something, she pleaded. The anger in her voice was fracturing the desperation bleeding through beneath it. We need this wine. The guests are coming. We cannot serve tap water. I thought you went up there to heal, I said. My voice carried no warmth at all. I thought this was a quiet family retreat. Why do you need $5,000 worth of wine for 3 people? Stop it, Wendell. Do not lecture me. Just find a way. Transfer money to Darnell. Do something. I cannot transfer money to Darnell, I said. I flagged his accounts as well, just as a precaution. You know how serious identity theft has become. I am simply protecting our assets, Dorothea. Being responsible. You are being difficult. She spat the words. That is what this is. You are punishing us. I am not punishing anyone, I said. I am sitting alone in my house eating a sandwich because you told me I was not wanted. I am simply following the bank's security protocols. Perhaps you should have planned more carefully. Or perhaps you should spend your own money. I hung up. No goodbye. I set the receiver back in the cradle and pulled the cord from the wall. I had no interest in hearing her call back. No interest in the begging that would follow. The game had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer the queen of anything. She was a woman with a declined card and a cart full of wine she couldn't pay for. I turned back to my monitors. I brought up the feed from the cottage's living room. 10 minutes later, the front door swung open. Dorothea stormed inside. Empty-handed, she flung her purse onto the sofa I had purchased 10 years ago and kicked off her boots. She looks furious, I whispered to the empty room. Priscilla walked into the frame, holding a clipboard. Where is the wine, Dorothea, she asked. The caterers are setting up the bar. We need the Bordeaux for the VIP tasting flight. Dorothea paced the room. Your father-in-law, she spat. He cut us off. The cards are dead. He says it is a fraud alert, but I know him. He is doing this deliberately. He is squeezing us. Priscilla's face went pale. She set the clipboard down on the coffee table. What do you mean, dead all of them? All of them, Dorothea confirmed. Mine, Darnell's. He locked the accounts. We have 0 purchasing power. Darnell came in from the kitchen, gripping a bottle of cheap beer. What's happening? He asked. Why is Mom screaming? Your father froze the accounts, Priscilla said. Her voice was clipped, controlled. She was calculating. A shark who had just detected blood in the water and realized it was her own. We have no wine. We have nothing for the main course. The caterer wants the second half of the deposit in cash on arrival. Darnell sank into a chair. He had the look of a child watching his balloon drift away. We're finished, he said. We have to call it off. You can't throw a gala with no food and no liquor. The investors will tear us apart. We are not canceling, Priscilla snapped. She wheeled on him, eyes burning. Do you have any idea what we have sunk into this? Do you know who is walking through that door tonight? If we pull out now, we look like amateurs. We look like con artists. We need that money, Darnell. We need the donations tonight or we lose the condo next month. She was unraveling. I could see it in the way her fingers twisted the ring round and round. The pressure had become unbearable. They were leveraged to the point of collapse, and I had just knocked out the only beam holding their whole structure upright. So what's the move? Darnell asked. Priscilla drew a long breath. She scanned the room as though an answer might peel itself off the expensive wallpaper. Then she crossed to her designer handbag. She reached in and pulled out a thick envelope. I zoomed in with the camera. It was a bank deposit bag, the kind used by businesses. We use the reserve, she said. Darnell got to his feet. No, Priscilla, no. That is seed money. That is the cash from the Toronto donors. We cannot touch that. That is illegal. That is embezzlement. It is survival, Darnell, she hissed. She opened the bag. I could see tight bundles of $100 bills. There had to be $10,000 in there. This is earmarked for the scholarship fund, Darnell said. His voice had gone thin. He already knew he was losing. "There is no scholarship fund yet, you fool," Priscilla said. She began counting out the bills. "We use this cash to pay the caterer. We use this cash to go buy wine at the liquor store down the road. We pay retail, we get the party moving. And tonight when the big checks roll in, we put it back. Nobody will ever know." Darnell dragged a hand through his hair. "Dad will know. He watches everything." "Your dad is 400 miles away getting drunk alone in his study," Priscilla said. She pushed the cash against Darnell's chest. "Take my car, go to the liquor store, buy everything on the top shelf. Don't ask for a receipt, just get it done." Darnell held the money as though it might burn him. "But what if we don't raise enough tonight? What if we can't replace it?" "Then we move the house faster," Priscilla said. She looked straight into the camera with no idea I was there watching. "We get the power of attorney next week. We sell this place and we wash the money through the foundation. It's a loan, Darnell. We are loaning ourselves the money to keep the family enterprise alive. Now go." Darnell glanced toward his mother. Dorothea was pouring herself something from a bottle she must have dug out of the back of a cabinet. She did not look at him. She did not stop him. She was complicit. She wanted her party. She wanted her status. She didn't care where the money originated as long as the glasses stayed full. Darnell turned and walked out the door with the stolen cash in his hand. I settled back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They had just stepped across the line from unethical into criminal. They were spending charitable donations on personal expenses. They were commingling funds, and they had done it on camera. I saved the video clip. I backed it up to 3 separate servers. This was no longer just ammunition for a civil suit. This was evidence for an indictment. I picked up my glass of bourbon neat. The ice had long since melted, watery, but it tasted like victory. They thought they had patched the hole. They thought they had outmaneuvered a difficult old man. All they had actually done was hand me the nail for their coffin. I checked the time. 4 in the afternoon. The party kicked off at 7. The guests would be arriving soon, the investors from Canada, the Marks. I opened my email once more. One more message to send. This one was to the catering company. I recognized them from the logo on the side of their van sitting in the driveway. Elite Palate Catering, I typed. To whom it may concern. Please be advised that the credit card on file for the event at 18 Lakeridge Point has been reported stolen. Any charges processed against this card will be disputed and reversed as fraudulent. I strongly advise you to demand full payment in cash immediately or cease operations at this venue. I hit send. Then I sat back to watch the show. Priscilla believed she had solved the cash flow crisis with the stolen donation money, but she had no idea the catering bill came to $15,000, and she was holding only $10,000 in that envelope. The arithmetic didn't work. And in my world, when the numbers don't add up, somebody pays the price. I watched on the monitor as the catering manager checked his phone. He frowned. He looked over at Priscilla. He began walking toward her. I leaned in closer. The minor inconveniences were finished. The real disasters were about to arrive, and I intended to enjoy every last moment of it. The memory of that afternoon 2 weeks earlier came back with the sharpness of high-definition film. I sat in my study amid the quiet hum of my servers, but my mind had drifted back to the passenger seat of Darnell's car. He was driving me to a strip mall on the edge of town. He'd told me that my primary care physician, Dr. Sumner, had abruptly retired. It was a lie. I had played golf with Dr. Sumner 3 days earlier, and the subject of retirement had never come up. What had come up was that his handicap was improving, but I didn't correct Darnell. I let him drive. I let him believe he was leading the lambs straight to slaughter. We pulled up to a clinic that smelled of rubbing alcohol and quiet desperation. The sign above the door read, Pinnacle Health Partners. It was the sort of establishment that built its practice around opioid prescriptions and insurance billing irregularities. We sat in the waiting room on plastic chairs that clung to my trousers. I slipped a hand into the breast pocket of my tweed jacket and pressed the top of my ballpoint pen. It was not a pen. It was a high-fidelity audio recorder, capable of picking up a whisper from across the room. The red indicator blinked once to confirm it was running. I eased it back into my pocket. A man emerged to greet us white late 40s, wearing a lab coat that was a size too small for him. He introduced himself as Dr. Dre. He did not extend his hand to me. He looked at Darnell and gave him a nod of recognition, the kind that signals a prearranged understanding. "Mr. Caldwell, come on back," he said. I shuffled as I walked. I let my shoulders cave forward. I kept my mouth slightly open. I was playing the part Darnell had scripted for me. The confused burden. The old man whose grip on reality was slipping. We entered an examination room that was conspicuously stripped of the usual medical fixtures. No blood pressure cuff on the wall. No cotton ball jars. Just a desk and a computer screen. "So, Darnell tells me you've been having some trouble with your memory," Dr. Dre said, eyes on the monitor rather than on me. I glanced around, pretending to be drawn by a poster of the human skeletal system on the far wall. "I suppose so," I said. My voice was thin, slightly unsteady. "Sometimes I misplace my keys." Darnell leaned toward the doctor. "It's more than keys. He forgets where he is. He gets aggressive. Last week he screamed at my wife for no reason. He thought she was stealing his silverware. I had yelled at Priscilla because she was loading my silverware into her handbag, but I didn't say that. I just stared at the floor and picked at a loose thread on my trouser leg. "I see," Dr. Dre said, typing something. "Aggression is a well-documented symptom of early-onset dementia. It can place enormous strain on the family." He didn't ask me to recall 3 words. He didn't ask me to count backward from 100 by sevens. He didn't check my pupil response. He was building a diagnosis on the testimony of a man who was $50,000 in gambling debt. "Do you know what year it is, Mr. Caldwell?" Dr. Dre asked. I paused. I let the silence do its work. I knew it was 2022. I knew the date, the hour, and the current trading price of gold. "I think it is 1997, I said softly. Darnell let out a heavy sigh. "See, this is exactly what we're dealing with." Dr. Dre nodded gravely. "The cognitive decline appears to be advanced. I can prescribe something to help with the agitation. It will keep him calm, make him easier to manage at home." Easier to manage. I was not a patient to these men. I was livestock. "Is it safe?" I asked. "I don't care for pills." "Perfectly safe," Dr. Dre said. "It's a mild sedative, haloperidol. It will simply help you sleep, Mr. Caldwell. You need your rest." He wrote out the prescription. He handed it to Darnell, not to me. "Make sure he takes this every evening," Dr. Dre said. "1 tablet at night. It will stop him from wandering." I studied the prescription pad sitting on the desk. I committed the DEA number printed at the top to memory. I memorized the exact spelling of his name. I looked at Darnell's face. He looked relieved. He believed he had one. He believed he now had the medical paper trail he needed to put me away. We left the clinic. I shuffled back to the car. But inside my chest, my heart was striking a steady, measured beat, the rhythm of a war drum. I had them. I had the doctor on tape prescribing an antipsychotic to a man he had assessed for less than 5 minutes. I had him conspiring with my son to chemically restrain me, back in the present, seated at my desk in the study. I reached into my pocket and drew out the pen. I unscrewed the cap to expose the USB connector beneath. I plugged it into my computer, the drive mounted on the screen. I opened the file. The audio waveform appeared, jagged peaks and valleys representing the betrayal of my son and the moral failure of a physician. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The recording was crisp. Dr. Dre's voice came through with perfect clarity. "Aggression is a common symptom. It will make him easier to manage." I opened my email client once more. This time, I was not writing to a journalist. I was writing to the state medical board. I had the direct address for the chair of the ethics committee, a woman I had served alongside on a hospital board years earlier. Subject: urgent report of medical malpractice and conspiracy to commit fraud. Dr. Gregory Dre. I composed the body of the email with the precision of a sniper lining up a shot. "Dear Director, attached you will find an audio recording taken on December 10th at the clinic of Dr. Gregory Dre. In this recording, you will hear Dr. Dre diagnosing a patient with advanced dementia without conducting a single cognitive test. You will hear him prescribing a powerful antipsychotic based entirely on the false testimony of a family member with a direct financial interest in that patient's incapacitation." I paused. I needed them to grasp the full weight of what I was handing them. This physician is selling diagnoses. He is an active participant in an elder abuse scheme. The patient in this recording is me, Wendell Caldwell. I am of sound mind and body. I am submitting this evidence to protect not only myself, but every future victim of this predator. I am demanding the immediate suspension of his license pending a full investigation. I attached the audio file. I attached a scanned copy of the prescription, which I had retrieved from the waste bin after Darnell discarded the receipt. I hit send, another missile away. Dr. Dre would be fielding questions from investigators by Monday morning. His career was finished. He simply didn't know it yet. I sat back and pressed my fingers against my temples. This game was exhausting. It demanded the kind of vigilance I had hoped to leave behind in the corporate world, but I couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. My phone buzzed against the desk. A text from Darnell. Dad just checking in. "Did you take your medicine?" Dr. Dre called and said, "It's really important you stay calm tonight. The pills are in the kitchen cabinet above the sink. Please take one. We want you to rest. Love you." I read it twice. Love you. The sheer audacity of it drew a laugh from me, dry with no humor in it whatsoever. He did not love me. He wanted me unconscious. He wanted me sedated so that if I tried to show up at the party or ring the police, I'd be too foggy to make any sense. He wanted me to be the drooling, vacant old man he'd been describing to everyone. I stood and walked to the kitchen. The house had gone dark. The only light came from the security LEDs on the motion sensors outside. I opened the cabinet above the sink, and there it was, an orange prescription bottle bearing my name, Wendell Caldwell. Take 1 tablet daily at bedtime. I opened it. The pills were small, white, and innocent looking, but they were chemical handcuffs. Haloperidol is prescribed for schizophrenia. Its effects include sedation, confusion, and profound lethargy. If I swallowed one of these, I'd be out for 12 hours. I walked to the sink. I turned on the faucet. I tipped the pills into the drain and watched them spiral away into the dark. I ran the garbage disposal just to make certain they were ground to nothing, but I couldn't leave the bottle empty. Darnell might come back. He might check. He had to believe his plan was bearing fruit. I went to where I kept my vitamins. I found a bottle of high-dose vitamin D3. The pills were white and round, nearly identical to the antipsychotics. Vitamin D3 meant energy. It meant clarity. It was precisely what I required for a long night of surveillance and measured retribution. I filled the prescription bottle with the vitamins. I screwed the cap down tight. I returned it to the shelf in exactly the position I'd found it. Then I picked up my phone and replied to Darnell. "Took it just now. Feeling sleepy already. Have a good night, son." I sent it. That was a lie. I was not sleepy in the slightest. The D3 was already working, sharpening my focus to a fine edge. I was fully alert, more alert in truth than I had felt in 20 years. I walked back to my study. The monitors were glowing. Up at the cottage, the party was getting underway. Guests were beginning to arrive. A black limousine swung into the driveway. A man in a tuxedo stepped out. I recognized him, a real estate developer from Toronto, a man whose pockets ran deep and whose appetite for due diligence ran shallow. He was exactly the kind of Mark Priscilla would have built this evening around. I sat down. I cracked my knuckles. They wanted me asleep. They wanted me silenced. Instead, they had handed me a front row seat to their own unraveling. I checked the time. 7:00 p.m. The gala was underway. I opened the smart home control panel. It was time to turn up the heat. Literally, the thermostat at the cottage currently read a comfortable 72 degrees inside. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 5 below zero. I smiled. Let's see how generous the donors feel once the cold sets in. I typed in a command. I overrode the manual controls at the cottage. I set the target temperature for the main heating zone to 50 degrees. Then I locked the interface so the setting could not be reversed. The furnace went silent with a single digital instruction. The warmth would drain out of the house gradually. First would come a mild chill. Then the coats would go on. Then the realization that something had gone seriously wrong. Phase 3 was active. The doctor had been reported. The pills had been flushed. The house was cooling. I poured myself a glass of water. I needed to stay sharp. It was going to be a long and thoroughly entertaining night. The clock on my desk read 7:14 p.m. Night had settled fully over western Pennsylvania, pulling a curtain of darkness and quiet around my home. But 400 miles north at the cottage, every light was blazing. On my wall of monitors, the security feeds showed a steady procession of luxury cars threading their way up the snow-covered driveway. It had the look of a funeral cortege for the wealthy, except they weren't here to bury anyone. They were here to part with their own money. I sat in my leather chair watching the faces of arrivals as they surrendered their coats to the catering staff I had alerted only hours before. The staff looked tense. They were demanding cash for tips up front. I watched Darnell moving frantically back and forth, pockets thick with the cash he had stolen from the foundation reserve, pressing bills into hands to keep the whole operation from unraveling. Chaotic behind the scenes, but to anyone who didn't know better, it had the veneer of exclusive hospitality. Then the first major arrival appeared. Beaumont Lacroix, a real estate mogul out of Toronto. I had done business with his father 2 decades ago. Beaumont was a man who leveraged everything he possessed to acquire things he had no real need for. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. Priscilla met him at the door. She had on a silver gown that caught the light under the chandelier and scattered it like cut glass. She looked like a trophy. She looked like success itself. She kissed Beaumont on both cheeks and steered him toward the bar where the wine Dorothea had fought so hard to obtain was already being poured. Then came the Americans. I spotted Grayson Hartley, a venture capitalist out of Cleveland who had built a fortune on tech startups and surrendered half of it to cryptocurrency. He was hunting for the next sure thing. Priscilla had clearly pitched the foundation to him as a tax shelter dressed up as philanthropy. She was whispering in his ear, touching his arm, laughing at remarks I knew couldn't possibly be funny. She was working that room with the cold efficiency of a predator moving through a school of slow fish. I leaned in and typed a command into my console. I activated the facial recognition software I normally use to secure high-value cargo shipments. I wanted a complete log of every person present. If this wound up as a federal RICO case, I intended to know exactly who the co-conspirators were and who the victims were. The software began building a list on my secondary monitor. There were local politicians. There were board members from other charitable organizations. There were people who had stood at my barbecue grill 10 years ago, breathing in the smell of hickory smoke and marinated chicken. People who now considered me too difficult to be around. They were drinking my liquor. They were standing on my hardwood floors. They were taking in the view of the frozen lake through my windows. And they were listening to my daughter-in-law weave a web of lies about global outreach and borderless education. I watched Darnell. He was standing near the fireplace holding a glass and looking utterly terrified. His eyes kept flicking toward the front door, as though he expected it to come off its hinges at any moment. He knew they were spending stolen money. He knew the walls were tightening around them, but he was too spineless to do anything about it. He was a passenger in a car driven by a woman who had already cut the brake lines. Then the camera panned to the center of the room. Dorothea had claimed her position. She was stationed beneath the crystal chandelier, holding court. She was wearing the diamond necklace I had given her for our 40th anniversary, a strand of flawless stones representing 4 decades of my labor. Tonight, it looked like a noose around her neck. She was holding court with 3 women, the wives of the investors. I turned up the audio gain on the microphone closest to her. "Oh yes," Dorothea was saying, her voice dipped in affected modesty. "We have owned this estate for generations. It is the family seat. We come here to restore ourselves. Wendell and I always intended for Darnell and Priscilla to take it over. It's their legacy, really." I took a slow sip of water. Generations. I purchased that land in 1994 from a farmer named McCready. There were no generations. There was a check I had written and a deed with my name on it. Dorothea continued gesturing with her champagne flute. "We're planning a significant renovation in the spring, a guest wing and indoor pool. The foundation needs room to host its annual summits. We're thinking of naming the new wing after my grandfather." She was selling them a fantasy. She was using a property she did not own to lend credibility to a scheme she barely understood. She genuinely believed that being my wife gave her the right to rewrite the story. What she did not know was that the prenuptial agreement she had signed 40 years ago, and had almost certainly forgotten about, explicitly classified all real estate acquired during the marriage as the sole property of the primary earner if purchased through a separate investment trust. The cottage sat inside that trust. She owned nothing. I watched her laugh. It was a bright tinkling sound. She looked happy. She looked like a woman who believed she was in control. She had no idea her credit cards were useless. She had no idea her husband was methodically dismantling her world from a study 400 miles away. She was dancing on the edge of a cliff and mistaking it for flight. The conversation shifted. One of the women, a brunette draped in heavy jewelry, leaned closer. "But Dorothea, where is Wendell? We expected to see him tonight. Is he not well?" A hush seemed to settle across the nearby circle. That was the question, the thing no one had yet addressed directly. Why was the honorary chairman absent from his own gala? Dorothea's smile slipped for the briefest fraction of a second. Her eyes moved to Priscilla, searching for a lifeline. Priscilla caught the signal immediately. She excused herself from the venture capitalist and glided across the room to the group. She wrapped an arm around Dorothea's shoulders. It's so difficult, Priscilla said. Her voice dropped a register. It became low somber, carefully respectful. We didn't want to make a formal announcement tonight because this evening is about the future, not the past. But Dad is struggling. Struggling how? The brunette asked. Priscilla exhaled slowly. She dropped her gaze to the floor, then raised it again with eyes that caught the light in a way that suggested tears. It's his mind. The dementia has moved so quickly. Just last month he seemed fine. Now he doesn't recognize us. I sat rigid in my chair. The cold fury that had been coiled in my stomach expanded upward, filling my chest. Dementia. Priscilla pressed on, warming to the performance. We tried to bring him tonight. We genuinely tried, but he becomes agitated. He becomes disoriented. He believes people around him are taking things from him. It wasn't safe, not for the guests, not for the children. We had to make the painful decision to place him in a specialized facility yesterday. A soft gasp moved through the small circle. Dorothea nodded, dabbing at a tear that didn't exist. It broke my heart, she whispered, to leave him there on Christmas. But it's what he wanted. In his clearer moments, he told us, Dorothea, protect the legacy. Make sure the foundation succeeds. Don't let my illness stand in the way of the work. Lies. Pure, undiluted lies. They were burying me alive. They were using my supposed incapacity to harvest sympathy and money in equal measure. Priscilla raised her voice slightly, directing it now toward the full room. Everyone, if I could have your attention for a moment. The room went still. Every face turned to her. She stepped up onto the raised hearth beneath the cheap vinyl banner. I know many of you are wondering about Wendell, she said, her voice breaking with practiced precision. My father-in-law is a remarkable man, a titan of industry. But, as many of you know, even titans fall. His health has declined significantly. He is now in round-the-clock care. But his final instruction, his absolute directive to Darnell and to me, was that this gala go forward. She paused for effect. She glanced at Darnell, who was studying his shoes. He told us, Priscilla said, raise the money, build the schools. Don't let my fading memory stand in the way of the future we built together. That is why we are here tonight, to honor him, to honor his vision. A murmur of approval moved through the room. Heads were nodding. They were taking it all in. The narrative was immaculate, the tragic fall of a great man, his loyal children stepping into the breach to carry his work forward. So, Priscilla said, lifting her glass, tonight I am not simply asking you to donate. I am asking you to invest. Invest in Wendell's legacy. Our goal this evening is $500,000. If we reach it, we break ground on the first center this spring. Do it for the children. Do it for Wendell. She drank. The room drank with her. And then the checkbooks appeared. I watched Beaumont Lacroix draw out his checkbook. I watched Grayson Hartley reach into his inside pocket. I moved my hand to the mouse. I clicked on the video recording software. Save clip. Save as evidence Exhibit A. I had them. This was fraud. This was theft by deception. They were soliciting funds on the basis of a materially false representation of my mental state and my expressed wishes. Under the law, that was a felony. I checked the timestamp on the recording. 7:45 p.m. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Option 0. It held the full dossier I had assembled over the preceding 48 hours. The tax returns, the forged signature, the recording of Dr. Dre, and now the video of Priscilla declaring me mentally incompetent and raising money in my name. I looked at the faces of my family on the screen, Dorothea radiant in her stolen diamonds. Darnell huddled in the corner, Priscilla flushed with the adrenaline of the con. They believed I was in a facility somewhere. They believed I was staring at a wall and drooling into a cup. I was not in a facility. I was at my command center and I was moments away from dropping the hammer. I opened the email draft I had already prepared for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Financial Crimes Unit and the FBI White Collar Crimes Division. Subject: immediate report of wire fraud and charity scam. Involving cross-border transactions. I attached the files. I attached the video clip I had just recorded. I paused for 1 second. Just one. I thought about the little boy I had held in my arms 32 years ago. I thought about the woman I had married in a small church in Virginia. But then I looked back at the screen. I watched Priscilla laughing as she accepted a check from Beaumont. I watched her glance at the amount. I saw the greed sitting naked in her eyes. Before I tell you what I uncovered that night and what it would reveal about the people I had trusted most, I want to ask you something. If you discovered that someone close to you had been quietly working to undo everything you had built, would you confront them directly, or would you gather every last piece of proof first and let the truth do the work? They had killed the father, they had killed the husband. All that remained was the auditor. I pressed the enter key. Message sent. I leaned back. The clock moved. 10 p.m. The authorities had the information. The journalist had the information. The medical board had the information. Now it was time to make the guests uncomfortable. I opened the smart home control panel once more. The temperature inside the cottage had already fallen to 65 degrees. People were beginning to button their jackets, but it wasn't cold enough yet. I turned to the lighting controls. I selected the preset labeled strobe alarm. It was designed to disorient intruders. I turned to the audio system. Earlier that day, I had uploaded a particular audio file to the server. It was not Christmas music. It was a recording I had pulled from the security cameras 3 days earlier. The argument between Darnell and Priscilla, the one where she called me a useless old relic and he called her a money-hungry leech. I queued it up. I looked at the screen one final time. They were toasting. They were celebrating. "Let the games begin," I whispered. I executed the lighting command. On the monitor, the chandelier's warm golden glow vanished, replaced by a harsh, blinding white strobe, firing 10 times a second. The party froze. Guests shielded their eyes. Someone dropped a glass. Then I hit play on the audio. It was not my voice that came through those ceiling speakers at 100 dB. It was Priscilla's, amplified and inescapable. "I don't care if he dies. Darnell, we need the money." The look on Priscilla's face as her own words thundered through the room was worth every dollar I had ever put into that property. The war was no longer quiet. It was deafening. It was flashing. And it had only just begun. I sat in the darkness of my study, the cold blue light of the monitors, the only thing illuminating the room. The video feed from the cottage continued, though I had muted the sound. I didn't need to hear any more. I had already heard my daughter-in-law declare me incompetent. I had already heard my wife rewrite 4 decades of shared history to flatter her own vanity. I had watched my sons stand mute while they buried my reputation along with my freedom. For 40 years, I operated by a code. Family was sacred. You protect them. You provide for them. You forgive them. I had held to that code when Darnell failed out of college the first time. I held to it when Dorothea overspent our budget by 30% for 5 consecutive years. I held to it when Priscilla came into our lives with her gaze fixed on my balance sheet rather than my son. But a code of conduct depends on both parties honoring it. A contract becomes void when one side acts in bad faith. Tonight, the breach was total. I looked at the glass of bourbon neat sitting on my desk. I carried it to the wet bar across the room and poured it down the drain. I needed zero impairment. I needed the cold, precise clarity of a surgeon excising a tumor. The man who had poured that drink an hour earlier was still clinging to a thread of hope. He had thought perhaps the shock would be enough. Perhaps cutting the credit cards and draining the heat from the house would bring them to their senses. That man was gone. The Wendell Caldwell who sat back down at that desk was not a father or a husband. He was the vice president of logistics. He was the man who had once dismantled an entire regional division in a single afternoon because they were skimming off the top. I opened the biometric safe recessed into the side of my desk. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. It beeped, and the heavy steel door swung open. Inside sat a single black hard drive labeled Project Border. I had compiled that data 6 months ago. At the time, I told myself it was insurance. I told myself I would never use it. It was too nuclear. It would shatter Darnell's life so completely, there would be nothing left to rebuild. I had planned to destroy it to carry these secrets to my grave, to keep my son out of federal prison. But Darnell had made his choice. He chose the lie. He chose the theft. He chose to declare me gone while I was still very much present. I plugged the drive into the tower. The folder opened. Option 0. That was the term we used in the industry. When a supply chain becomes so riddled with corruption that it cannot be salvaged, you don't attempt repairs. You nuke it. You sever every connection, burn the manifests, and initiate Option 0. I opened the files. It was a complete autopsy of my son's financial life. Block 2. The documents filling the screen were dense routing codes, transaction histories, columns of figures. To most people, they would have looked like tedious bank records. To me, they read like a confession. I opened the subfolder labeled Cayman Holdings. 2 years ago, Darnell came to me seeking advice on international shipping regulations. He told me he was launching a consulting firm to help small businesses clear customs. I was proud. I gave him my contacts. I shared my knowledge. I had no idea he was using that foundation to construct a money laundering apparatus. The documents revealed a series of wire transfers from the Bright Future Foundation operating account to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name CNT Global Logistics. The directors of CNT Global were not disclosed publicly, but I had gone deeper. I traced the IP addresses used to access the accounts. They resolved to my own home network and the Wi-Fi at Darnell's condo. They were moving money offshore. They were taking donations intended for charity and funneling them into a foreign account to escape U.S. taxes. That was tax evasion. That was wire fraud. That was money laundering. I pulled up the invoices. They were masterworks of fiction. Invoice number 409. Consulting services for cross-border supply chain optimization. Amount $25,000. There were no services. There was no supply chain. There was only Priscilla wanting a new car and Darnell needing to clear a gambling debt. I cross-referenced the dates. Every time a substantial donation landed in the foundation account, a corresponding invoice from CNT Global appeared within 48 hours. They were bleeding the beast as fast as they fed it. I looked at the total sitting in the Cayman account, $150,000. That was federal prison. That was 10 years at a minimum. And they had been careless about it. They had used their real passports to open the accounts during a vacation I had paid for. They had signed the documents with their own signatures. They had left a trail of evidence that pointed directly to their front door. A pang of nausea moved through me, not at what I was about to do, but at the sheer waste of it all. I had given Darnell every advantage. I paid for tutors. I paid for private schools. I opened doors for him that most men spend an entire career trying to find. And he had used every one of those gifts to become a petty thief. He wasn't a businessman. He was a crook, and not even a competent one. I closed the invoice file. I opened the tax returns they had filed jointly the previous year. Declared income of $40,000. On paper, they qualified for government assistance. In reality, they drove Range Rovers and wore Rolexes. Tax fraud. The IRS had no patience for lifestyle discrepancies of that magnitude. I had the evidence. I had the intent. I had the motive. I looked at the folder sitting open on my screen. It was a smoking gun, and I was about to place it in the hands of people with badges. Block 3. I opened my secure email client once more and drafted a new message. This was not going to a journalist. This was going to people who carried weapons and federal authority. Recipient 1, FBI Financial Crimes, Division New York Field Office. Recipient 2, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Financial Integrity Unit. Recipient 3, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, Whistleblower Office. Subject: immediate report of international money, laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Priority high. I kept the body of the email short. I kept it factual. To the special agent in charge. Attached is a dossier containing banking records, wire transfer logs, and incorporation documents for a shell entity known as CNT Global Logistics, registered in the Cayman Islands. These documents establish a systematic pattern of money laundering and tax evasion carried out by U.S. citizens Darnell Caldwell and Priscilla Novak, operating under the cover of a charitable organization known as the Bright Future Foundation. I attached the entire contents of the project border drive, gigabytes of damning evidence. I added one final line. The subjects are currently located at 18 Lakeridge Point near the Pennsylvania and Ohio border, actively soliciting further funds from international investors using fraudulent financial statements. They are a flight risk. I reviewed the attachments. Everything was in order. The map to their destruction was complete. Then I opened a second email window. This one was addressed to Renee Okafor. Subject: Civil Litigation Strategy. Option 0 initiated. Renee, the nuclear option is now in motion. The federal crimes have been reported. Get the civil filings ready. I need them done now. Serve eviction notices on the condo. File a restraining order to keep Darnell and Priscilla away from me. One more thing, Renee, draw up a divorce petition. Irreconcilable differences. Infidelity across every dimension, financial, moral, personal. Dorothea is to be out of the house no later than January 1st. The same evidence file is attached. my eyes drifted to the digital clock on my computer screen. It turned from 9:59 to 10 p.m. Exactly, the witching hour, no hesitation, no prayer, no tears. One click to send the law enforcement email, one click to send the attorney email. Progress bars swept to the right. Sent, sent. That was it. Both messages were loose in the world. The machinery of federal justice had begun its slow grinding rotation. Somewhere in a government building, a server was tagging this as urgent. An agent's phone was about to light up. I pushed back in my chair and let out a breath I'd been holding for months. The room felt lighter. The air felt cleaner. Decades of my life had gone into building a fortress around my family. This evening, I had swung the cannons around and aimed them at the walls. I pulled up the monitor trained on the cottage. Priscilla was laughing. Darnell was drinking. Dorothea was brooding. None of them had the faintest notion that their world had already ended. My hand moved to the smart home control panel. The legal ordinance had already been fired. Phase 2 was psychological. I brought up the HVAC controls, then the lighting grid, then the audio server. Time to clear the room, I said. My finger hung above the execute button. Mercy had run its course. What came next was consequence. On my monitor, the digital thermostat inside the cottage told the story in real time. At 70 degrees, 68, 65, 400 meters away in my study, I watched those numbers fall with the detached satisfaction of a man running a controlled experiment. Beyond the cottage walls, the Canadian winter raged at 5 degrees below zero. I had just unlatched the gate and waved it in. The HVAC master control unit, $60,000 worth of climate engineering, had been built to keep occupants warm and comfortable. I had other plans for it tonight. This wasn't a simple thermostat adjustment. I triggered the emergency venting protocol, a function engineered to purge smoke from the structure after a kitchen fire by blowing the attic and subfloor dampers wide open. What it created was a wind tunnel. I kept my eyes on the video feed. For a while, nobody reacted. The booze and the self-congratulation kept them insulated. Thermodynamics, however, answers to no one. Not money, not charm, not status. Cold is patient. It announced itself first at the floor, a draft licking at ankles, a chill climbing the back of the legs and up the spine. A woman in a strapless blue gown crossed her arms and shuddered. Beaumont Lacroix. The real estate mogul fastened the button on his tuxedo jacket. The house was hemorrhaging warmth. Everything they had siphoned from me was bleeding away into the night air. Darnell was the first to notice something was wrong. He crossed to the wall panel in the hallway. I zoomed the camera in tight. His finger was hammering the touchscreen rapid, frantic jabs at the glass. He wanted the temperature up, but I had severed his access to the local controls. The display threw back a bold red padlock and the words, "System Override Administrator Access Required." Darnell stood there blinking. He turned in a slow circle, the look on his face that of a man waiting for someone smarter to walk in and handle it. His gaze found Priscilla across the room. She was mid-laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. He shaped the words with his mouth. "It is freezing." She gave him a sharp look and a wave that said, "Deal with it." He had nothing. He didn't know the admin password existed, let alone what it was. He was a squatter in a house he'd convinced himself he owned. The thermostat hit 60 degrees. The party's composure cracked visibly. People were making no effort to hide the fact that they were hunting for their outerwear. The coat check attendant who'd been extorting tips all evening was suddenly swamped as guests crowded in demanding their furs and heavy wool trenches. "You tried to freeze me out of everything I built," I murmured at the screen. "Now tell me, what does 0 degree feel like?" Physical misery was accumulating, but discomfort alone wouldn't scatter them. Grumpy people huddle. They don't bolt. I needed to fracture something deeper. I needed their senses overwhelmed. I closed out the HVAC panel and brought up the lighting grid. The cottage ran on a Lutron system, millions of programmable colors, sequences, intensities. Years back during a security audit, I had coded a specific routine. Its label intruder, disorient. The design randomized stroboscopic bursts at full intensity, engineered to trigger nausea and spatial confusion in an intruder. Tonight the intruders had pocket squares and cufflinks and were sipping my vintage Merlot. I checked the clock. 10:20 p.m. Speeches done. Networking at full pitch. Every check had been signed and handed over. The timing could not have been better for a light show. I armed every zone: living room, dining room, kitchen, foyer, and the exterior floods washing white light across the snow outside. Intensity 100%, speed maximum. I took one sip of water. My hand settled over the mouse. Let there be light. I clicked. What happened next on my monitors was immediate and brutal. The soft amber warmth of the crystal chandeliers blinked out of existence. The room detonated in white. Flash black, flash black. Picture a lightning storm sealed inside four walls, and the storm refuses to quit. My security cameras couldn't hold the frame rate, and the feeds became stuttering spectral images, all hard edges and shadow gaps. I watched guests throw their arms up, shielding their faces. A waiter lost a full tray of champagne flutes. The glasses hit the hardwood and burst apart, but caught in the strobe, the shards scattered like diamonds in slow motion. Balance became treacherous. The stroboscopic effect eats depth perception alive. Reaching for a surface, planting a foot, setting down a glass, all of it suddenly unreliable. Grayson Hartley had both hands on the back of a sofa, white-knuckling it to keep himself upright. Terror was written clearly on his face. Nobody in that room believed this was a tripped breaker. They were being attacked, and they knew it. Priscilla's mouth was open. She was clearly screaming something, but the audio hadn't started yet. She tilted her head up at the ceiling fixtures as though fury could restore them to normal. In the stuttering light, her face cycled through rage and panic in rapid, disjointed flashes. It looked demonic. It was chaos, perfect, deliberate chaos. Every trace of the evening's elegance had been stripped away. What remained looked like cornered animals. Phase 1, visual complete. Phase 2, thermal still running. Phase 3, narrative cued and ready. Every person in that cottage was rattled, frozen, and off balance. Exactly the audience I needed. I opened the audio server. Running through the ceiling speakers in every room was a Sonos system architectural whole home designed to be invisible. Right now, it was cycling through ambient classical music, the kind selected to make wealthy donors feel cultured. I cut it. The sudden silence after the strobe was its own kind of weight. It pressed down on the room. The guests went still waiting. Their working theory, I assumed, was a power anomaly. Lights would stabilize. Normal would return. They were wrong on every count. I pulled up the file I had spent 3 days assembling. I'd named it Truth Serum Wave. It was a curated reel of recordings pulled from the property's security system, the last 3 days' worth of unguarded conversation, the definitive highlight reel of my family's betrayal. I pushed the volume to master level, every speaker indoors and out at full capacity. My cursor sat over the play button. This was it. This was the night the Bright Future Foundation died. I pressed play. No musical introduction, no ambient let-in. The file opened on a sharp crackle of static, and then Priscilla's voice filled the house, enormous and unmistakable. The old man needs to die. Darnell, we cannot wait 5 years. We need that money now. The crowd locked up where they stood. Even the strobe seemed secondary. They were statues. Her voice came again, carrying clean off the vaulted ceilings. He is a useless old relic. Just get him to sign the papers and we can dump him in a state home. I don't care if he rots. On my screen, I watched it happen to Priscilla in real time. She went perfectly still. She stood at the center of the room, mouth open, eyes blown wide the way people look when the ground has fallen out from under them. Her own voice, her own words, spoken in the supposed safety of her bedroom, in the certainty that no one was listening. The recording pressed on. Darnell's voice came next, thin, petulant. But Dad will know. He checks the accounts. Then Dorothea, sharp as a blade. Who cares what Wendell thinks? It is my money, too. I earned it by putting up with him for 40 years. Every person in that room had stopped breathing. The investors who had signed checks that same evening, who had shaken hands with these people, taken their word, were now hearing exactly who they had trusted, plotting in their own voices to destroy the man they had all just stood and applauded. It was raw. It was ugly. It was the truth delivered at 100 dB. My eyes went to Beaumont Lacroix. He moved with great deliberateness, one hand reaching inside his jacket. He drew out the check he had written earlier that evening. He studied it for a moment. Then he tore it cleanly in two and let the pieces fall at his feet. He turned toward Priscilla. There was nothing confused in his expression. What was there was something far colder, absolute disgust. The strobes kept hammering. The voices thundered down from the ceiling speakers. The frozen air tore through the vents. Whatever this evening had been built to celebrate was gone. The nightmare had taken its place, and I had barely begun. The stroboscopic assault showed no mercy, chopping the room into stuttering fragments of panic and disorder. From my study 400 meters away, I had a front row seat as the gala's social fabric came apart, thread by thread. The audio of my family scheming over my death had run its course, but the weight of what those words meant hung in the frigid air like something poisonous. These people were no longer philanthropists writing generous checks. They were prey who had just understood they had been sharing a room with hunters. Beaumont Lacroix moved first, not a walk, a march. He carved through the crowd with the focus of a man who had not been disoriented by the chaos, only enraged by it. He made straight for Priscilla, who stood near the fireplace wrapped in her silver gown, visibly shaking. "Give it back!" The words tore out of him over the howl of wind through the open vents. "Hand me that check right now." Priscilla attempted a smile. It came out wrong, a contortion, not a comfort. "Beaumont, please," she said, her hands raised in a gesture of appeasement, her voice cracking. "This is a technical glitch. Someone got into the system. That recording was fabricated, AI generated. We are being targeted by cyber terrorists. A desperate lie, the kind that belongs to this era. But Beaumont Lacroix had built skyscrapers from the ground up. He understood the difference between a system malfunction and a controlled demolition. "Don't you dare lie to me," he bellowed. His hand closed around her arm, a breach of decorum that told you everything about how far the room had already fallen. "I heard your voice. I heard you say you wanted him to rot. Give me my money back." He reached toward the stack of checks resting on the mantel. Priscilla shrieked and threw herself across them, shielding the papers with her body as though they were something sacred. Her only child was greed. "No," she screamed. "This belongs to the Foundation. You signed it. That is a binding contract." The atmosphere in the room pivoted from bewilderment to outright hostility. Watching Beaumont make his move, the rest of the crowd caught the signal. The herd instinct kicked in hard. Every person in that room suddenly wanted what they had written back. Grayson Hartley shouldered his way toward the fireplace. The local politicians who'd been nursing my wine all evening began patting their pockets. It was a bank run, the humankind, messy and absolute. Dorothea tried to step in front of it. She planted herself between the crowd and Priscilla, her diamond necklace strobing under the flashing lights. "Please," she called out, reaching for a tone of command. "Everyone needs to calm down. There has been a misunderstanding. We are the injured party here." "Get out of the way, Dorothea." A woman's voice cut through the noise. "You're a fraud. We all heard what you said. 40 years, that's how you described your own marriage. You're disgusting." The wall of polite society had crumbled to rubble. A man in a velvet jacket reached past Dorothea and seized a fistful of envelopes from the table. Priscilla went for him with her hands. He pushed her back. She went down hard on the hearth in her heels. She scrambled upright, not to assess the damage to herself, but to sprint for the front door. She pressed her back against the heavy oak arms spread wide. "Nobody leaves." Her voice had gone raw. Her eyes swept the room in the stroboscopic light, wild and desperate. "The roads are ice. It is not safe out there. We have to hold until the technical issues are resolved. You are not leaving with those donations." She was trying to lock the truth inside with her. She believed she could still contain it if she could just hold the door. Beaumont Lacroix didn't slow down. He walked toward her with the unhurried certainty of a large man who has never doubted an outcome. He looked down at my daughter-in-law, shaking from cold and adrenaline both. "Step aside," he said, "or I'll do it for you." Priscilla turned her eyes to Darnell. Darnell was tucked behind the bar, one hand wrapped around a vodka bottle like it was a life preserver. He did not step up. He did not move toward his wife. He left her standing alone in front of that crowd. Beaumont gripped the door handle. Priscilla tried to hold it shut against him. It was never a fair contest. He stripped her hands off it and threw the door wide. The Canadian night blew in snow and wind and the kind of cold that ends arguments. "Get out," he shouted back at the room. "Everyone clear out before these grifters decide to take your coats as well." What followed was a rout. People slipping on the floor, elbowing past each other, swarming the coat check girl, who had no chance of keeping up. I observed it all with the same detached precision an auditor brings to watching a company liquidate under investigation. They were evacuating the scene, and their checkbooks were going with them. Priscilla sagged against the doorframe, tears tracking down her face as she watched her fortune disappear into the storm. "Come back," she called after the retreating cars. "You promised us. We have a contract. But a contract built on fraud is just paper. and tonight there was no good faith left in the room to honor it. I settled back in my chair. The physical rout was well underway, but reputational destruction required a finishing blow. I checked my email. It had been 2 hours since I sent the tip to Conrad Pemberton in Toronto. The timing had landed perfectly. I spotted a guest near the door, a man named Aldridge, well connected among Toronto's banking circles, pull out his phone. He stopped walking, his brow furrowed. He swiped across the screen slowly. Then his head came up. His eyes found Dorothea, who was gripping a wine bottle near the staircase. Aldridge raised his phone above the crowd. "Is anyone else seeing this?" he called out over the wind. What remained of the room went quiet. The stragglers near the exit froze. "It's from Conrad Pemberton," Aldridge said. "He's reporting that the Bright Future Foundation is under active RCMP investigation for money laundering. He says the honorary chairman, Wendell Caldwell, has filed a formal identity theft complaint against his own son." The information detonated across the room. A recorded conversation could be waved off as a hack dismissed as a stunt. A confirmed filing from the most feared financial journalist in Canada was a different matter entirely. "Let me see that," Grayson Hartley said, reaching for Aldridge's phone. He read the screen. The color left his face. "It says here they've been routing funds through the Cayman Islands. It says the entire board of directors is a fabrication." He turned and looked directly at Darnell. Darnell let go of the vodka bottle. It hit the floor and exploded. "Is any of this true?" Grayson's voice was quiet now, the dangerous kind of quiet. "Did you launder my donation from last year?" Darnell opened his mouth. "No, I mean, it's complicated. It's a tax strategy." "It is a crime," Grayson said flatly. He was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling my attorney. I'm calling the district attorney." Phones came out across the room. The digital virus I had seeded was multiplying through group chats and private threads. The news was moving through the elite's inner circles at the speed of panic. "Did you open the attachment?" a woman asked. "It's a tax return. They reported $40,000 in total income." "Look at this one," a man said. An invoice for a leased Range Rover charged directly to the scholarship fund. They were combing through my evidence package right there on my property. They were running the audit on my behalf. Dorothea looked around the room, and what she saw finally reached her. This was not a bad evening that could be slept off. This was the end of her standing, her community, her identity. She was no longer the steadfast wife of a difficult man. She was the matriarch of a criminal enterprise. She turned toward the stairs. "Where do you think you're going?" Aldridge's voice stopped her cold. "You are not going anywhere. The police are already on their way. The article says the FBI has been notified." Dorothea froze mid-step. She stood on the staircase like a figure caught in a photograph, rigid and pale, the strobe still cutting across her face. I turned my attention back to Priscilla. She had slid down the wall near the entrance and was hunched over her phone. She'd found the article. She'd seen the comments piling up across the social media feeds. Her name was circulating in the worst possible way. She looked up at Darnell. What was in her eyes wasn't fear. It was hatred. "Fix this," she said in a low hiss. "You told me your father was too stupid to figure it out. You said he wouldn't notice." Darnell looked at her. He looked at the mob still milling through the room. He looked at the broken glass scattered across the floor. And then he fell back on the only instinct left to him. He reached for outside help. I watched him pull his phone from his jacket, his hands shaking badly enough that he nearly fumbled it. He was jabbing at the screen, holding it to his ear, pulling it away, jabbing again. He was trying to reach his lawyer, or perhaps the tech support line for the smart home system. Or maybe he was trying to move the foundation's money before a freeze could lock it down. It didn't matter either way. Whatever he was reaching for, he couldn't get to it. I pulled up the network administration panel on my third monitor. An enterprise-grade firewall had been running on this property for years, one I'd installed myself. It gave me precise device-level authority over everything connected to the network. I had flagged the MAC addresses for Darnell's phone, Priscilla's phone, and Dorothea's tablet days in advance. 10 minutes earlier, I had moved all three into a quarantine group I labeled hostile entities. Internet access severed. Wi-Fi calling severed. And because the cottage sat down in a valley near the border, cellular reception was unreliable to begin with. Whatever reliable signal existed came through the microcell booster I had put in the attic. I shut it off. Darnell was holding a paperweight. I watched him cross to the wall panel, the iPad mounted near the kitchen that ran the house systems. He wanted the lights stopped. He wanted the heat restored. He started tapping. Access denied, bold red letters. He punched in a passcode, his birthday. I had swapped it out yesterday for the date I terminated his internship 5 years ago. He tried again. System lockout. He let out a scream and drove his fist into the wall beside the panel. "Why is nothing working?" He shouted at no one. His eyes landed on the router blinking in the corner. He went straight for it, unplugged it, plugged it back in. The classic maneuver of the man who doesn't know what else to try. The router rebooted. The indicator lights cycled green. He figured he had solved it. He checked his phone. Still no signal. He hadn't grasped that the router was functioning exactly as designed. It was simply following my instructions to treat his device as invisible. Priscilla rushed over. "Call the police," she said. "We need these people gone. They are going to turn on us." "I can't," Darnell said. "The phone is dead. The internet is down. Dad must have forgotten to pay the bill." Forgotten. He still hadn't arrived at the truth. He was attributing this to negligence. He could not stretch his mind far enough to see it as the precision strike it was. "Try your phone," he told Priscilla. She pulled it out. Nothing, no service at all. "We are trapped." She moved to the window. Heavy snow was coming down in sheets, a white wall cutting them off from everything beyond the glass. The last of the departing cars had been swallowed by the storm, their tail lights gone. Darnell, Priscilla, and Dorothea were alone inside the freezing strobe-lit house. No bank accounts, no internet, no way to call for help. A digital prison, and I held the only key. I watched Dorothea lower herself onto the stairs. She pulled her fur coat in tight around her shoulders. "Wendell," she whispered. No rage in it this time. No performance. Just the slow, cold arrival of understanding. "Wendell is doing this." Darnell stopped pacing. He turned and looked at the security camera mounted in the ceiling corner. The red indicator light pulsed steady and unblinking. He walked toward it. He stopped directly beneath the lens and looked straight up into it. "Dad." The word came out small, stripped of everything. "Dad, if you can hear me, please stop. It is cold. We are scared." I leaned forward to my microphone in the study and pressed the talk button. My voice would travel 400 meters over the secure fiber line I had kept live for exactly this moment. It would come out of the concealed speakers in the living room, not filling the space this time, but intimate, close. The kind of voice that gets inside your head. "I am not your dad right now, Darnell," I said. "I am the landlord, and you are very far behind on the rent." He lurched backward as though the camera had reached out and touched him. I released the button. I checked the clock. 11:30 p.m. Law enforcement had the evidence. The guests had heard the truth. My family had the fear. There was only one item remaining on the agenda. I needed to wait for the knock at the door. I poured a glass of water and settled back. On screen, I could see them crowded together on the sofa, shivering beneath the strobing light, waiting out a night that would deliver nothing but consequences come morning. The silence in my study was total, but on those monitors the war had gone internal. They weren't fighting me anymore. They were fighting the understanding that they had already lost, and that I was the one who had signed the papers ending their lives as they knew them. The digits on my desk clock rolled silently from 11:59 to midnight. Christmas morning had officially arrived. Across the country, fathers were on their knees, assembling toys. Mothers were arranging things beneath trees. In my study, the only gift being prepared was an indictment. I sat in darkness, the blue light of my monitors, the only illumination. The room held the kind of silence you associate with a sealed vault. 4 hours in that leather chair. My body had gone stiff, but my mind was running at a frequency that felt like current moving through wire. On the screens, the upheaval at the cottage had settled into something grimmer, a static tableau of defeat. My family lay huddled on the living room floor, wrapped in curtains and tablecloths they had pulled from wherever they could find them, trying to hold warmth against the 60-degree chill I had engineered. The strobes kept their rhythm pulsing over the scene, like a migraine made visible. They looked broken, they looked finished, but I didn't trust that reading for a second. Cornered rats are the most dangerous kind, and Darnell and his wife were very cornered and very recently aware that the trap had sealed behind them. I watched Darnell staring at his phone. He had been doing it for hours, willing a signal into existence. 5 minutes ago, I'd extended him a small courtesy. I had partially re-enabled the attic booster, just enough to let data trickle through. Not out of mercy. I did it because I wanted them reading the headlines before the handcuffs were on. I wanted them to know with full clarity exactly what was bearing down on them. I kept watching. I kept waiting. Then I saw it happen on the high-definition feed. Darnell's eyes went wide. The color abandoned his face all at once, leaving him looking hollowed out. He gulped at the screen rapidly, then turned it toward Priscilla. She grabbed it from his hand. Her mouth dropped open. She screamed something I couldn't make out. I had cut the audio feed to let myself absorb the visual in silence. Then my personal cell phone lit up on the desk. I looked at the time. 12:12 a.m. The caller ID read, Darnell Caldwell. I did not pick up immediately. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3. Let him sit in the uncertainty, wondering whether I was somewhere asleep or dead, or simply watching him and choosing not to answer. On the fourth ring, I drew my thumb across the screen and raised the phone to my ear. No greeting, no Merry Christmas. I breathed into the line and let the silence do its work. Dad, is that you? His voice was a high, strangled pitch that pushed against my eardrum. He sounded like a man drowning in a shallow water. Dad, answer me. I know you're there. I'm here, Darnell, I said, low measured, the same register I used years ago to inform a captain his vessel was being seized by customs. Dad, what is happening? I just got a push notification. CBC News. It went to my phone, Dad. Your name is in the headline. I leaned back and let my eyes travel to the ceiling. Is it? I said. What does it say? You know what it says? His voice cracked completely. He was past hysterical. It says Wendell Caldwell, logistics magnate, exposes cross-border charity fraud ring run by family. It says there is an active investigation, the FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Dad. It names me. It names Priscilla. It says we are laundering money. I reached for the glass of water, cool against my palm. Well, Darnell, I said, are you... There was a strangled sound from the other end. Dad, stop. This is not a joke. You have to call them. You have to contact the paper and tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you did not send those files. They have tax returns, Dad. They have the Cayman account numbers. How do they have that? I gathered the data, Darnell, I said. I ran the audit myself. Did you genuinely believe I wouldn't notice $100,000 moving through my own network? Did you think I was too old to read a spreadsheet? And I heard a struggle on the line, the phone being wrestled from his grip. Then Priscilla's voice arrived in my ear, and it was nothing like Darnell's. Where his had been frightened, hers was venomous. It was the sound of a woman who has watched the game slip away and decided to overturn the table on her way out. You senile old bastard, she hissed. You think you are so clever. You think any of this actually proves something. I will destroy you. I will go to every person who knows you and tell them you have lost your mind. I will say you fabricated all of it because you couldn't stand watching your son succeed. Nobody is going to believe a word you say. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely old man rattling around in a house too big for him. I looked at her on the monitor. She was standing in the middle of my living room, shivering inside that silver dress hair, gone wild eyes with nothing stable left in them. She looked diminished. She looked like exactly what she was. Say whatever you like, Priscilla, I told her. You'll be saying it from a holding cell. You cannot do this to us, she screamed. We are your family. We are the only ones who give a damn about you. If you put us in prison, you will die in that house alone. Do you hear me, Wendell? You will rot in there, and nobody will come looking for you for weeks. I let the threats run. They moved across me the way water moves across stone, touching nothing, changing nothing. She was reaching for a fear I simply did not carry. Being alone held no terror for me. What had terrified me once was the possibility that I was a fool. Tonight, I had settled that question. Put Darnell back on, I said. No, she snapped. You don't get to speak to him. He is my husband. Put him on Priscilla, or I end this call and you can present your version of events to the tactical unit that is currently turning onto Lakeridge Point. A beat of silence. Then I heard the phone being shoved at him. Dad? He was barely managing the word. Dad, please, we can make this right. I will pay back every dollar. I will work. I will do whatever it takes. Just tell them to stand down. Tell them there was a misunderstanding. Tell them it was a drill. It is too late for that, son, I said. The supply chain has been disrupted. The cargo has been seized. Dad, why? He was sobbing now. You were supposed to protect us. Mom said you were just being difficult. She said you were grumpy. Why did you have to take it this far? I closed my eyes for a single moment. A small boy on a bicycle flickered across the back of my mind. Then I opened them and saw instead the man who had forged my signature and arranged for my delivery to a care facility. "I am not difficult, Darnell," I said. My voice carried no warmth at all. "I am not grumpy, and I am not senile." I let that sit. I wanted the words to reach something deep in him. I wanted him carrying this exchange through the next decade of a federal sentence. "You violated the contract, son. You stole from the hand that built you. You conspired against the mind that formed yours. You read my silence as weakness and my generosity as stupidity." "Dad, please," he started. "I am not your father right now," I said. "I am the consequences of every decision you made. I am the audit you were certain would never come. I am justice." I looked at the monitor. Through the front window of the cottage, blue and red light was strobing against the snow. No sound reached me through the screen, but I knew those sirens were tearing through the frozen night out there. "Do you hear that, Darnell?" I asked. What sound?" he whispered. "The sirens, son. The cavalry has arrived, but they are not coming to save you." On the screen, the front door of the cottage exploded inward. Tactical figures poured through the frame. Red laser sights swept across the walls and ceiling. Darnell dropped the phone. I heard it strike the floor. I heard him cry out. I heard Priscilla shrieking. I heard the hard, commanding voice of a federal agent ordering everyone to the ground. I sat and listened for 10 more seconds. I listened to the sound of my family being taken apart piece by piece. I listened to the final moments of the Bright Future Foundation. Then I reached out and pressed the red button on my handset. Click. The line closed. I sat in the quiet of my study. The clock read 12:20 a.m., Christmas morning. I had just delivered the most expensive education of their lives. I pushed myself to my feet. My knees protested. The tiredness I felt was real, but it was the right kind. The tiredness that comes from finishing something properly on time and within the parameters I had set. I crossed to the window and looked out at the dark and silent street. I was alone. No family breakfast waited in the morning. No gifts had been arranged beneath any tree. But my accounts were untouched. My name had been restored. The parasites had been cut away. "Merry Christmas, Wendell," I said quietly. I switched off the study lights and climbed the stairs to bed. I was going to sleep without difficulty for the first time in a very long time. The monitors in my study offered a silent, high-definition record of my family's undoing. I sat without moving, hands resting flat on the desk, watching the tactical team work their way through the cottage's perimeter. There was nothing sloppy about it. This was a precision operation, the kind of logistical execution I had spent an entire career studying and demanding from my own people. The front door did not open on a hinge. It came apart under a battering ram in a single blow, sending a spray of wood fragments into the foyer that caught and swirled in the strobe lights I had left running. Agents flooded the hallway in tight formation, every movement clean and deliberate. I could read the bold yellow letters on their tactical vests from where I sat. FBI. Behind them came the darker uniforms of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, a joint operation multi-jurisdictional assembled in response to a cross-border crime. I had not simply placed a call to local authorities. I had triggered an international response. Inside the living room, the collapse was immediate. I watched Priscilla break for the kitchen heading, I assumed to burn documents or get to the cash she had been sitting on. She covered perhaps 3 steps. An agent cut off her angle before she reached the 4th. She screamed something I couldn't catch. I had muted the audio once more to watch undistracted, but her body said everything. She swung at him. That was her mistake. He rotated her hard, swept her legs, and she met the hardwood floor with the full weight of the impact. I watched him pin her wrists behind her. The silver gown she had selected to impress Toronto's finest was now twisted and riding up as she kicked furiously against the floor. Darnell did not run. He simply stopped. He stood near the fireplace with his eyes wide and his hands rising in something caught between surrender and supplication. He was staring at the door, staring at the weapons, staring at the moment his constructed world made contact with the real one. The red laser sights moved through the room in slow, deliberate arcs, cutting through the strobing white light. They crossed the cheap vinyl banner, they swept the furniture, then they found the chests of my son and his wife and held there. The raid was violent. It was loud. Every second of it had been arranged by me, and I felt nothing resembling guilt or remorse. What I felt was the specific satisfaction of a man who has finally balanced a ledger that has run in the red far too long. They had thrown open my home to the world in order to defraud it. Now the world had walked back in to settle accounts. A camera angle shifted when an agent clipped the tripod stand near the bar. The frame recentered on the middle of the room, where what remained of their dignity was being fully dismantled. Priscilla was face down on the floor, an agent's knee pressed into her back. The woman who had curled her lip at me across the breakfast table, who had dismissed me as difficult and senile, was now pressed against my own floorboards. Her hair tangled and matted, still shouting threats that carried no force left in them. She was no longer the president of anything. She was suspect number one. But it was Darnell who held my attention. My son. The boy I had once stood behind guiding his hands as he learned to knot a tie. The man who had concluded he was smarter than me. He was against the wall, an agent at his back, hands being drawn behind him for cuffing. The agent's voice was measured and sharp. "Spread your legs. Stop moving." And then I saw it. A dark stain appeared at the front of Darnell's expensive tailored trousers. It emerged at the crotch and spread downward along his leg with a speed that made the moment unmistakable. He had lost control of his bladder. I zoomed the feed in close. There was no other interpretation. In the full weight of this moment, confronting the consequences of his own construction, my son's body had simply given way. He was weeping. I could see it in the movement of his shoulders and the collapse of his posture. His face was the face of someone who has just confirmed that the worst thing they ever feared is in fact entirely real. It was pathetic. It was visceral. It was the body telling the truth that his words had spent years concealing. He had wanted to occupy the role of the powerful man. He had cast himself as an international financier, operating at a level beyond my comprehension. But when genuine pressure arrived, he didn't harden under it. He dissolved. I took a sip of water. I watched him being turned around. The agent noticed the stain. The agent's face showed open contempt. He handled Darnell with considerably less care after that, steering him roughly across the floor to where his wife lay. They ended up side by side, Priscilla bound and seething, Darnell bound and soiled. The strobes kept pulsing overhead, throwing their humiliation into sharp relief with every flash. This was the future they had been building toward. This was the bright future they had promised everyone. Agents were already working through the rooms. Laptops were being pulled and bagged. The cash Priscilla had stacked on the table was being counted and documented. Someone was photographing the banner. The case was being assembled with methodical care. Every document, every drive, every misappropriated dollar entered into the record. I looked at Darnell one last time. He had found the camera. He knew I was behind it. He knew I had designed every moment of what was happening to him. His expression was pure supplication. He was mouthing the word Dad over and over, silent on my end of the glass. But I was not his father tonight. I was the witness. And a witness doesn't step in. A witness watches and records. In the far corner, settled on the velvet sofa, Dorothea had been spared the physical force of the breach, but the psychological impact was rolling over her in waves. An agent stood above her, attempting to ask questions she apparently could not hear. She wasn't looking at her son lying on the floor in wet trousers. She wasn't watching her daughter-in-law being read her rights. She was focused on the small velvet box resting in her lap, gripping it with both hands white-knuckled pressed to her chest, like a woman going down in open water. I knew what that box held. The diamond earrings I had given her the night Darnell graduated high school. The sapphire brooch my mother had left her. She was weeping freely. Mascara had carved black channels down both cheeks, cutting through the hours of careful preparation. Her fur coat had slipped from one shoulder. She was shaking. I turned up the feed on the microphone near the sofa to hear what she was saying, the murmured words coming through the sobs. Why is he doing this? He is evil. He is a monster. She meant me. Even with the FBI filling the room and her son under arrest for federal crimes, she had positioned me as the problem. Not her greed, not her willing participation in all of it. The man who had finally refused to keep funding her life, that was who she blamed. He ruined Christmas! She wailed at the agent, who looked as though he had never been less prepared for a conversation. He did this to embarrass us. He is nothing but a bitter, spiteful old man. Make them stop. Tell Wendell to call this off right now. Ma'am, the agent said, measured and patient. Your husband is not present. This is a federal warrant. This is a federal operation. Please set the box on the table. No, she cried out. She folded herself around it tighter. These are mine. He cannot have them. He takes everything. He has always controlled everything. She was hollow under all of it. A woman who had organized her entire identity around possession, and now that the possessions were being inventoried and removed, there was nothing underneath to stand on. She showed no concern for Darnell's fate. What she mourned was her standard of living. A female agent moved toward Dorothea. Carefully but without hesitation, she worked the jewelry box free from my wife's grip. Dorothea cried out a sound stripped of everything except raw loss. The agent opened the box. She wrote down the contents. Evidence. Potential assets subject to seizure under the RICO Act, proceeds of crime. Dorothea fell back against the sofa and covered her face with both hands. "I hate him," she whispered. "I hate him so much." I sat in my study and registered nothing. Her hatred had no more weight than the tantrum of a child sent early to bed. I had loved her once. I had constructed an entire world with her in mind. She had traded it for a party and a performance. The agents began moving them out. Priscilla went first, still kicking, still screaming. Darnell followed, shuffling forward with his head down. Dorothea came last, guided by the female agent crying still for her diamonds. The room cleared out. The strobes kept working over the debris of the gala. Broken glass chairs knocked sideways, the banner hanging torn from one side. It was finished. The property was secure. The criminals were in custody. I reached for the control panel. I cut the strobes. I cut the audio. The screens went dark and still. I stood up from the chair. Time to sleep. There was a full morning ahead. I had to make a drive to the police station, not to arrange release, but to hand over the final pieces of the file. "Merry Christmas, Dorothea," I said to the empty room. "I hope the accommodations suit you." I pulled my vintage Lincoln into the precinct parking lot at 8 Zelba Road in the morning on Christmas Day. The sky had gone hard and brilliant blue, the kind that suggests warmth and provides none. The roads were quiet, a few families heading to church services, the occasional plow still working through the drifts left by the previous night's storm. I chose a visitor space away from the other vehicles. I stepped out and buttoned my wool overcoat. I checked my reflection in the window glass. Tie centered, shoes polished. I did not carry the look of a man whose family had spent the night being processed. I carried the look of a man walking into a board meeting where he held 51% of the voting shares. I entered the station with a leather briefcase. Inside it were the supplementary materials Renee Okafor had compiled overnight, along with 3 documents that would sever the last legal threads connecting me to the people in those holding cells. The sergeant at the front desk looked up young, worn down, visibly resentful of the holiday assignment. Before he could ask for identification, the heavy steel door behind him buzzed and swung open. Chief Floyd Kerrigan came through, a man I had known for 20 years. We sat across from each other at the poker table on the first Friday of every month. He knew my handicap. I knew about his daughter's tuition situation. He looked like someone who had been awake too long, but he straightened when he recognized me and put out his hand. "Wendell," he said. The grip was solid. "I am sorry you are walking in here on a holiday like this." "The work doesn't stop for the calendar, Floyd," I said. "How are they?" "Processing," he exhaled. "The feds have taken jurisdiction over Darnell and Priscilla, wire fraud, interstate dimensions, all of it. They're being transferred to the federal detention facility in Pittsburgh this afternoon. Dorothea is still here. State charges only for now, conspiracy possession of stolen property. No federal exposure yet." I nodded. "Can I see her?" Kerrigan paused on that. "It is well outside the normal procedure, Wendell. She has been asking for legal representation. She has also been calling your name for the better part of 6 hours. I am not coming in to comfort her, Floyd. I need to serve legal notice it is a civil matter, with bearing on the criminal proceedings. My attorney cleared it with the district attorney's office. 10 minutes. Kerrigan held my gaze for a long moment. He was checking for something, the raw edge of a grieving husband, some crack in the surface. He found only the auditor. "All right," he said, "but I am posting an officer in the room." I followed him through the buzzing doors and down the linoleum corridor that carried the smell of floor wax and stale air. We passed the interrogation rooms. From behind one of the doors came the sound of a woman weeping. It sounded like Priscilla. I kept walking. The visitor room was at the corridor's end. Kerrigan opened the door, acknowledged the officer posted in, and stepped back. "Good luck, Wendell," he said. I walked in. Dorothea was at the metal table, one wrist cuffed to a steel ring bolted to the surface. The change was absolute. The woman who had presided over the gala 12 hours before, layered in furs lit by chandeliers, had been replaced entirely. What sat across from me now was a tired, rumpled woman in a cocktail dress that smelled of stale smoke and dried sweat. The mascara had tracked all the way down her face in dark streaks. Her hair, which normally held its shape regardless of conditions, was flat and lank against her head. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were swollen nearly shut from crying. For a brief moment, something lifted in them. Hope. She believed I had arrived to resolve this, that I would open the briefcase and produce the check that made the problem disappear. "Wendell," she breathed. "Oh, thank God you're here. Get me out of this place. This has all been one terrible mistake. They treated me like I was a common criminal. They took my necklace. They took my rings." I pulled the chair out and sat down. I set the briefcase on the table between us. I folded my hands. "They took the evidence, Dorothea," I said. "Those pieces were acquired with funds generated through fraud. They are not your rings. They belong to the creditors." Her face collapsed. Her free hand strained toward me across the table, fingers spread, but the cuff chain had no give. "Wendell, enough," she begged. "You've taken this further than it needed to go. We understood the message. You put the fear in us. All right, we hear you. We made a mistake. You belonged at that table. You deserve to be heard. But a jail cell, Wendell, that is not where people like us end up. That's for criminals." I studied her face. 40 years that woman had slept beside me. I searched her eyes for the person I had stood beside at the altar and found nothing. That woman had been devoured long ago, swallowed by someone who ran on the approval of people who didn't matter. "You are criminals, Dorothea," I said, flat. No heat in it at all. Decent people don't engineer a scheme to strip their husband of his legal capacity. Decent people don't watch their son loot a company and say nothing. Decent people don't skim money meant for the poor. She flinched hard as though I'd cracked her across the face. "Everything we did was for this family," she hissed. The pleading dissolved on the spot, replaced by something sharp and accusatory. "You hoard it all, Wendell. Millions sitting in accounts while you meter out pocket money to grown adults. That money was necessary. Darnell was sinking, and you stood on the shore watching. I was in that boy's corner every day of his life," I said. "I paid for his schooling. He stepped into the working world without a dollar of debt. I opened doors for him. He walked to the casino instead. He chose comfort over effort. And you covered for him because the illusion of his success made you feel good. You are a monster," she spat, "perched there in that expensive coat like some hanging judge. There is nothing behind your eyes. There never was. You're arithmetic dressed in a suit. That is why I doctored those expense reports. That is why I backed their play. Because a woman like me was owed something better than a husband made of ice. That was it. The thing she'd kept submerged finally broke the surface. It wasn't love. It had never been love. I was a financial arrangement she tolerated, and the moment I looked likely to cancel the arrangement, she moved to have me removed permanently. "I deserved it," she screamed. "I sat through your punishing hours. I sat through every last tedious word about shipping lanes. Every penny I went after I had coming." I gave a single slow nod. "I earned it." Word for word what the recorder had captured at the party. "Well, Dorothea," I said, "I'm relieved to hear you say so. It clears my conscience considerably for what happens next." My hand went into the briefcase. Out came a thick blue folder. I pushed it flat across the metal surface between us. "What am I looking at?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Divorce papers," I said. "Irreconcilable differences, attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit bodily harm." A laugh tore out of her, shrill unraveling at the edges. "You don't get to divorce me, Wendell. 40 years of marriage. Half of everything is mine by right. The house, every account, the pension. You are not walking out of this with me holding nothing. The courts don't work that way." I dipped into the briefcase a second time. What I produced was a single page of aged yellowed paper, sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve. I laid it over the divorce filing. "Tell me whether you know what this is." She leaned forward and squinted. The ink was blue. The date at the top was 40 years old. "That is our prenuptial agreement," I said. She made a dismissive sound. "Ancient history, something a judge would toss before lunch." "That paper is a relic, Clause 7. "Dorothea," I said. She bent closer, mouth moving silently as she parsed the language. "Clause 7. In the event that either party is convicted of or admits to a felony crime against the estate of the other party, including but not limited to fraud, embezzlement, or theft, all claims to marital assets are immediately forfeited, and the offending party shall receive zero spousal support." The reading stopped. Her head came up. Every trace of color had drained from her face. "You confessed I said to the FBI on tape. And moments ago, sitting right there, you told me you were entitled to take what you took because of what you endured with me. That is your admission, Dorothea." Her head swung side to side. "No, none of that will survive a courtroom." "It will survive," I said. Renee Okafor wrote that clause, and right now she is walking it into the courthouse. Dorothea's breathing went ragged and shallow. "But where does that leave me? The house, the cottage." A third document came out of the briefcase, an eviction notice. "The cottage sits inside a trust," I said. "You hold no interest in it. The main house was mine before I ever met you, bought in my name alone. You've been formally served, Dorothea. Both properties vacated without delay. Whatever belongings you have will be packed up and held in storage for 30 days. Once that window closes, they go to auction to cover what you owe in legal fees." She sat there staring at the pile of documents in front of her. It was as if a structure she had lived inside for decades was folding in on itself floor by floor. 65 years old, no profession. No transferable skill, no access to funds, no marriage to shelter behind, and a felony conviction taking shape on the horizon. "Wendell, please," she breathed. The voice that came out was barely there. "Please, I'm an old woman. I'm frightened. Don't let this happen. Help me find a lawyer. Let me walk back through that door. Things would be different. I would be different. I would finally be what you needed." I got to my feet. I did up the buttons on my coat. I looked at her from where I stood. Something moved in my chest, a faint, brief thing like pity. The kind that flares up when you see an animal broken on the roadside. Love was not part of it. Love is built on trust. And trust was something she had killed deliberately, without hesitation. "There is no coming home, Dorothea," I said. "You reduced it to ash. The moment you concluded I had more value to you in a coffin than in a chair, you struck that match." I moved for the door. "Wendell," she screamed. "Wendell, don't walk away. You cannot abandon me in here. It is Christmas." My fingers closed around the door handle, and I stopped. I kept my back to her. "Yes," I said, "I am aware it is Christmas, and what I am giving myself this year is quiet." Then I was through the door. It sealed behind me with a buzzing click, and her voice disappeared. Down the corridor I went. Chief Floyd Kerrigan met me at the end of it, and we shook hands. "You holding up Wendell," he said. "Never better Floyd," I told him. "Just finished taking out the trash." I stepped outside into a morning that was cold and ruthlessly bright. Snow threw the sunlight back in the sky. I breathed in deep. Something had lifted off me. I felt years younger. I climbed into the vintage Lincoln and brought the engine to life. One errand remained before I returned to that empty house. I'd be driving to the border. The cottage was waiting. The locks needed changing one final time. After that, a chair by the lake, and whatever time it took for the water to go solid. I was on my own, but for the first time across 40 years, solitude and loneliness were not the same thing. I was free. July heat had turned the federal courthouse in Pittsburgh into a slow oven. Courtroom 4, though, ran cold, the kind of refrigerated air that seems engineered to keep emotions flat. I occupied the witness stand in a navy blue suit, cut precisely to my frame. I straightened my silk tie. I took in the jury, then the judge, then the defense table. Darnell and Priscilla sat in orange jumpsuits. That Christmas Eve swagger, the certainty that they could outmaneuver me, had been hollowed out, completely traded for the blank, worn expression of people 6 months into federal custody. The proceedings had amounted to a formality. What I handed over left no room for doubt. The forensic accounting was exacting. The recordings told the story better than any witness could. Their court-appointed attorney, visibly stretched too thin, mounted the only defense available, that a tyrannical, loveless father had pushed his children past the point of reason. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, facing me during cross-examination, "do you love your son?" I found Darnell's face across the room. He was fixed on his own hands, 20 pounds gone. He could have been anyone. "I love the potential of my son," I said, not a tremor in my voice. "I loved what I made possible for him. But criminals don't have my love, and I don't underwrite terrorists, not even the homegrown variety." Something moved through the jury box. The attorney put his notepad down and said nothing further. Sentencing came and went quickly. The judge, sharp-eyed with a gaze you could sharpen a blade on, delivered her findings. She named what they had done a grotesque abuse of trust, a crime of sophisticated financial design. Darnell's name was called first. 10 years in federal prison wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. No tears. His body simply gave way, forward brow meeting the table, the posture of a man who has run every calculation and accepted the result. Then Priscilla's turn. The bench regarded her with something that went beyond disdain. This one had been the engineer of the whole operation. The judge had seen past the performance and found the mechanism beneath, the intent, the precision of the cruelty. 15 years, the judge announced wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse across multiple counts. Priscilla screamed. It was a raw animal sound. The marshals got hold of her and hauled her out, heels dragging, curses flying, my name on her lips, until the heavy courtroom doors cut her off. I rose from my seat. I did up my jacket. I did not spare Darnell a glance as they walked him out in chains. I pushed through the courthouse doors into the hammer of the summer sun. Renee Okafor was already on the steps waiting. "It is done," she said. "It is done," I agreed. The ledger was balanced. I did not go home and grieve. I did not plant myself on a bar stool. I went to the office. There was work waiting. The assets of the Bright Future Foundation needed to be unwound and every stolen dollar returned to the people it had been taken from. Months of work, but every cent would be accounted for. What I felt was not sadness. It was the quiet satisfaction of a project manager who has finished decommissioning a broken system. The supply chain was clean again. The liability had been removed. 3 weeks on, I found myself pulling into a discount supermarket on the south side of the city. It was not my usual stop. I had a specialty grocer near the house for that. But this trip had a purpose. I needed to verify the condition of a former dependent. I went through the automatic doors. Floor wax and discount produce, that was the smell of the place. I picked up a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, then moved to register 4. The woman working the counter wore a blue smock name tag sitting crooked on her chest. Her hair showed gray roots beneath a faded dye job. Hands that had once been soft and carefully manicured were dry and unsteady as she dragged a bag of frozen peas across the scanner for the person ahead of me. It was Dorothea. She had aged 20 years in the space of months. The divorce had wrapped up 2 months prior. The prenuptial agreement had stood exactly as Renee predicted it would. Her admission of involvement in the fraud wiped out every claim she had. No alimony, no house, no share of the pension. She had exited the marriage with whatever was hanging in her closet and a used sedan I had let her keep out of pity. She finished with the customer ahead of me. She looked up. Her eyes landed on mine and she went still. The scanner sat idle in her hand. "Hello, Dorothea," I said. She stared. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. She looked at my suit. She looked at my watch. She was looking at the life she used to occupy, standing right in front of the register. "Did you come to gloat?" she whispered. Her voice had gone rough. "I came to buy milk," I said. I set the 2 items on the belt. She scanned them. Her hands shook badly enough that she fumbled the bread onto the floor. She retrieved it. She did not meet my eyes again. "That will be $5.50, she said, directing it at the register rather than at me. I laid a $20 bill on the counter. "Keep the change," I said. She took it. She put it in the drawer. She did not thank me. "You destroyed me," she hissed as I lifted my bag to leave. "You took everything. I am in a studio apartment above someone's garage. I stand on a concrete floor for 8 hours every shift. My legs ache. I am 65 years old, Wendell. How could you do this to me?" I looked at her. I saw the woman who had ordered $5,000 bottles of wine while working to have me committed. "I didn't do this, Dorothea," I said. "You did. You were the one who violated the terms. You moved to liquidate the primary asset. What you're living now is simply the market correction." I turned and left. No guilt followed me out. What I carried was clarity. She was precisely where the outcome had placed her. For the first time in her life, she was earning what she received. A late education, a necessary one. I drove north away from the city, toward the border, toward cooler air and deep water. The cottage in summer was a different property than the one I had last seen under snow. The lawns were full and green. The flower beds which I had replanted with my own hands were in bloom. The banner was long gone. The furniture sat where it belonged. The place had stopped being a crime scene and become a home again. I stepped out onto the wide deck above the lake. The grill was going. The smell of hickory smoke and marinated chicken drifted up from it. I was not alone out there. Around the large outdoor table sat 6 young men and women in casual clothes, animated, laughing, pushing ideas back and forth. They were the inaugural recipients of the Caldwell Logistics Scholarship. The money I had stopped funneling to Darnell and Dorothea, the money I would otherwise have spent defending myself in court, I had redirected it. I had put it into the future instead. These students were sharp. They were hungry for it. They came from places where nothing arrived without effort and no door opened on its own. They reminded me of who I had been 40 years ago. I stepped to the grill and turned the chicken with the same attention I gave to any operation worth running. Mr. Caldwell, a student, called out a young man named Kofi, working toward a degree in supply chain management at Carnegie Mellon. We went through that case study you assigned, the one on the shipping container fraud out of Singapore. What did you all conclude? I asked. You have to check the weight manifest against the volume, Kofi said. If the numbers don't line up, you stop the ship. I smiled. Exactly right. You stop the ship. You don't sit back hoping things resolve themselves. You don't disregard what the data is telling you because you happen to like the captain. You stop the ship. I plated the food and we gathered at the table. The sun was going down behind the lake, turning the water gold and violet at the edges. The talk around that table was alive, substantive, mutual. These young people had no interest in my money for anything frivolous. They wanted tuition paid. They wanted the door opened. They regarded me with genuine respect, not because circumstance required it, but because I held knowledge they were determined to acquire. I raised my glass of vintage Merlot, the kind Dorothea would have swallowed in 2 pulls without registering what it was. 2 standards, I said. The students lifted their glasses of iced tea and soda. 2 standards, I drank. I turned my eyes to the water. My wife had called me difficult. My son had called me grumpy. My daughter-in-law had called me senile. Every one of them was mistaken. Difficult was not the word. Discerning was the word. I held 2 standards, and for far too long I had bent those standards for people who shared nothing with me but a last name. I had corrected that error. I looked at the empty chairs where Darnell and Dorothea used to sit. I did not miss them. I missed the version of them I had once believed existed, but that version had always been a fiction. And fiction is a liability no well-run operation can carry. The quiet of the lake was exactly right. The laughter from the students was the real thing. My accounts were secure. And that is where we leave Wendell Caldwell, not bitter, not broken, but seated at a table he had rebuilt with his own hands, surrounded by young people who had earned their place at it. It cost more than I expected. Not the money was recoverable. What cost was the time I spent telling myself that loyalty and blood were the same thing. They are not. I had to lose everything I thought I had before I could see clearly what I actually owned. I believe God does not remove people from your life to punish you. He removes them to protect what is still worth saving. That lesson came late, but it came. If this story left you with anything, let it be this. First, never sign your name to something you have not personally verified, no matter who is asking. Your reputation is the one asset that cannot be recovered from a forged signature. Second, the people who call you difficult are often the ones who benefit most from your silence. Discernment is not a flaw. Third, if the numbers do not match, stop the ship. In business, in family, in life, when the data tells you something is wrong, believe the data before you believe the excuse. Fourth, what you build for the next generation outlasts everything your enemies tried to take. These are the kinds of father stories I find myself returning to, stories about what a man does when his own family becomes the threat. Dad's revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is precise, patient, and permanent. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to His Hidden Revenge. There is always another account waiting to be settled. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.